Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Ba-da-boom-boom. Here we go. Here we go. We're streaming today. We're streaming today. Here we go. Yes, I know. We're streaming today. We're streaming today. We're feeling really hot 'cause the temperature's going up. But I don't care, we're streaming today, we're streaming today, we're streaming today, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey Eric, how you doing, bud? Oh, it's hot. It's hot, man. We are now officially getting in to the moment where all of the data is coming off of the page and is beginning now to enter reality. Yeah, apparently it's 20 record high heat records. You bet it is. You bet it is. And here we are, going through it all together. Midnight Rose, absolute pleasure to see you. Good evening, John. Nice to see you again. Random question. Oh, perfect. To start off your stream. This whole thing is random questions. I think it's time for me to just stop pretending like it's anything else. It's just answering random questions, right? And occasionally I read an article, but it's mainly random questions. Have you heard of the concept of the noosphere? I have not, but I am more than willing to spend just a moment looking up something called the noosphere. Let's take a look at what the noosphere is. A postulate sphere or stage of evolutionary development dominated by consciousness, the mind, and interpersonal relationships. Frequently with reference to the writings of Teilhard de Chardin. A philosophical concept developed and popularized by the Russian, Ukrainian, Soviet biochemist, French philosopher, yabba yabba. He defined the noosphere as a new state of the biosphere and described the planetary sphere of reason. The noosphere represents the highest stage of biospheric development, that of humankind's rational activities. So this sounds to me, like it is, it sounds to me like what it is it's an attempt to describe the collective consciousness. That's what it sounds like it is to me. That this is just like the Eastern version of something that the CIA itself has confirmed. That humanity has a collective consciousness. That we are not individuals in the sense that I live by myself and I am not connected to any other person that lives outside of me at all. There is a collective consciousness of humanity. That's something I've always thought of and believed in. Maybe I've lacked the language. I think most people who lack the language to talk about these things tend to talk about them in terms of like Buddhist religion or Christians would basically call this concept God. But really, we have as humans a collective consciousness. And the CIA did studies on this. You can look this up. There are YouTube channels that talk about this back in the 60s and 70s. And they confirmed that humanity has a collective consciousness. And moreover, they did experiments and studies and they discovered that they could manipulate it. So one of the big ones was that they noticed that if a group of people were purposefully meditating with the intention of bringing peace into a region, that it would actually drop the crime rate by as high as 10%. So collective consciousness is something that exists. And for sure, the CIA is manipulating it, for sure. It's another reason why I think doing this is so important. Because what are we doing but raising consciousness, right? Raising consciousness. And so raising consciousness is, I think it's important. And something like the noosphere seems to me to be an articulation of that just upon cursory glancing. Like literally what I just read there is everything I've ever read about it. So if it's different than that, please correct me. But to me, openly discussing something like the collective consciousness, I think is actually important because we are being dominated and controlled by institutions that are actively manipulating human consciousness and this collective consciousness in order to maintain their own structures and their own power, right? Have I seen the Jordan Peterson and RFK conversation? I didn't actually watch it because I know what it looks like. Like, when I saw that they did it, I was like, so what do you think about this issue? Well, we're gonna make sure that the free market markets it freely, and those will be the solutions. I agree with those ideas as a person who makes money grifting people. Like, I don't really care to like this. Like, when I sit down and listen to stuff, it's because I want something that is surprising or interesting. And I just don't think the conversation between Jordan Peterson and RFK is going to be particularly interesting, honestly. Because honestly, like, I am to a point now where I just don't think Peterson is a very interesting person anymore. Like, for a moment he was interesting, and it was interesting what the capitalists were attempting to do with him, but like, cat's out of the bag. He's a grifter. Like, and once somebody reveals to you fully, like, in the full light of day, that they are nothing but a grifter, you got to move on. Like, you just got to move on. Like, there's no reason, and anytime anybody brings them up and talks about them, the only thing you need to talk about is, hey, remember when Jordan Peterson went on Joe Rogan's podcast and revealed that he was a climate change denialist and a total fraud? Remember how he basically took his pants down in front of everybody and wagged his dick around and essentially admitted to everybody that he is not a credible person who should not be taken seriously and should not be listened to on any subject whatsoever, right? Like, remember when he did that? Oh, remember that his rise to prominence and fame was essentially based on a lie? That he basically lied about what Bill C-11 was, and basically lied to everybody about what it was going to do, so that he stirred up a transphobic moral panic about it, and that's what rose him to prominence in the first place. Like, I just don't care. And RFK, like, near as I can tell, like, he seems like a well-meaning rich guy. Like, he seems like a rich guy who's a Kennedy, who is well-meaning. But at the end of the day, like, anytime you press him for solutions, the guy's basically like, we're going to let the free market decide. It's like, oh, okay, cool. So we're just going to keep failing as hard as possible. Okay, cool. The sphere of human consciousness and mental activity, especially in regards to its influence on the biosphere and in relation to evolution. The sphere of human consciousness and mental activity, especially in regards to its influence on the biosphere and relation to evolution. So it's not just the idea of a human consciousness. It's also how it connects to the natural world around us. Like, would that be more accurate to say that it's not just the concept of a human consciousness, but also that human consciousness is itself connected to the natural world around us? This is actually something really interesting that happened through the Enlightenment period, is that when the Enlightenment authors and scientists were writing about the world, they oftentimes would write as if man was not part of that world, right? And it's only been through time that there have been scientists and philosophers that have come up and been like, we should stop that. We should start thinking about reality and humanity as an interconnected thing, that we are part of it. And I think that's pretty common. I think even to this day, it's pretty common for thinkers to remove humanity from nature. That nature is this thing that's over here, and that we are separate from it, observing it, when in reality we are part of it. And it seems to me like this concept is doing that as well. It's not only acknowledging the concept of a human consciousness, or a collective consciousness, but it's also bringing up the idea that we're connected to reality. We're connected to the world around us. You better not scratch that door, my man. I took you down. I literally took you down right before this show. If you scratch that door, my answer is too bad, my man. Too bad. Nope. Too bad. Too bad, bud. I took you down. What did you think we went down for? Milo. Dogs. Right? Come on, buddy. Something the noosphere posits is the realization of this sphere manifests through social organization of society. That only the ultimate social organization could start the noosphere in its ultimate form, i.e. the collective consciousness. There's even a whole organization and field of study focused on it. Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. When communists gain the power of the state, will they manipulate the noosphere? I mean, it seems to me like humanity will always... There will always be some kind of energy within this collective consciousness. Like right now, the West is experiencing what I would call a malaise, right? Like we have fallen into a depression as a people. Like and I don't think that's deniable. Like we don't know what to do. We don't know how to organize. We don't have passion. We don't have energy. Our culture is essentially collapsed into a kind of childishness. Like, for real, the number one, like, big talking point that happened this last week was the Barbie movie, right? How the right wing, like, lost its mind over the Barbie movie, and then the left wing's, like, defending the Barbie movie, and it's like, the Barbie movie is a statement of feminism, and, oh, it's a man-hating... It's a children's movie, right? Like, it's a children's movie about a children's toy that was made for children in the first place, and that... A wise man, right? If you were a wise person and you understood that essentially this is a movie that little girls are going to go watch and that their moms are probably going to go watch these movies with their little girls because it's a toy that was designed for little girls. And, you know, moms are probably like, I had Barbies when I was a kid and now here's my kid and we're going to go see this movie together and it'll be a nice like daughter-mother bonding moment, right? And that's nice. And if you're a husband or a father that tagged along with this and you're sitting in the audience watching it and you're thinking to yourself, boy, the men in this movie are kind of like foppish losers, right? For the most part. Well, instead of going, oh, this movie is just a man-hating... You should think to yourself, hey, why do women relate to this? Why are women looking at this and thinking to themselves, yeah, Ken would be the ideal man, right? Maybe, crazy thought, right? They're relating to the statements that are made in the films because there is a little bit of like fantasy, right, that's going on, as if men are free of that idea, right? But also I just think that like, oh no, women want to live in a space where men are not being boorish assholes to them. Oh no. Like, oh no, for 2 hours, they want to sit down with their daughter and watch a movie where men are not treating them like shit the whole time. Oh no. But at the end of the day, right, it's a children's movie, right? It's a movie for kids, right, and their parents. And the idea that it's become like the center of the culture, the idea that we're all supposed to look at this and it's supposed to be elevated to this high point. This is the center now of our philosophical concern. What philosophical statements is Barbie making about the world, right? We're children. Like, it's a childish thing to do. It's childish for us to even spend that much time thinking about, because at the end of the day, it's a movie made by a toy company for children, and like watch it and just be like, yeah, because guess what? It doesn't matter that much, right? It doesn't matter that much. Even if all of the philosophical discussion and all of the tearing it apart and all of the intricacy and all the Ben Shapiro burning dolls and all this kind of dumb shit, right? Even if it actually had an impact on an impressionable youth and all of this, it's not going to be that much. There's like so much happening to these kids. Well, you think the Barbie movie is the thing that's going to put its hooks in? You think there's going to be a 60-year-old woman who's going to stand up in front of the nation being elected the president of the United States and says, because of the Barbie movie, I am banning all men? Like, it's a child, like our perception is so childish because I feel like we as a culture have fallen into this kind of childish malaise, that we're looking to reclaim our youth, our lost youths. We're looking to reclaim the promise of the West. We're looking to live in a world that makes any sense. And we are looking to have serious moral discussions, but anytime anybody serious actually stands up, they get blacklisted and banned and cut out from the conversation or murdered straight up. right? Like, Noam Chomsky doesn't have a regular slot at CBS or something, right? There isn't like a half hour with Noam on ABC or CNN or Fox or any of these places, right? They're not sitting down and asking this guy, widely regarded and widely considered the number one intellectual in America today, right? There's no news organization that's even spending 5 minutes with this guy, right? When he could have like a half-hour show and should have a half-hour show, right? But why doesn't that happen? Because he's a fucking adult who talks about things like an adult and who looks at the situation and says, well, if you want to be an adult and you don't want to have like a black and white, like Marvel movie mindset about everything, well, here's something to think about, right? Here's an idea to think about. Here's the history of this thing, right? But we don't do that. Why? Because we're children and we refuse to grow up. And that's within our collective consciousness as a people. We refuse to grow up. And it's easy to get caught up in things like the dumb Barbie movie bullshit. It's easy to get caught up in it because it's like right there. It's like right there. And it's like this like beautiful, enticing siren of like, hey, put aside all your worries and concerns. Yeah, sure, everything's heating up and the world is exploding. Absolutely. Hey, did you know that the ice in Antarctica isn't returning? That we've measured it and it's way, way worse than anyone could have ever predicted? Isn't that crazy? What? Don't think about that. What really actually matters is the Barbie movie. That's what really matters, you guys. The Barbie movie. And it's we're living in this total state of denialism because it's too much for people. It's too much for people. And the voices that are actually standing up and actually acting like adults just get pushed out. Just get pushed out. So to me, it's that our collective consciousness has become childish, that we refuse to grow up and we're just living in this sort of state of Neverland, like Peter Pan, right? We just refuse to grow up and just refuse to take responsibility for anything. And the most grotesque aspect of it at all is that the people who are walking around saying people need to take responsibility for themselves are the most irresponsible, erratic, psychopathic, narcissistic losers that exist in the society, hands down, and it's not even close. Like, we should be seizing the means of production away from the fossil fuel industry. We should be shutting down production. We should be shutting down, like literally we should be looking at the polluting industries and we should be saying, shut it down. And anytime anybody says, but won't that do, we say, yes, it will. And move on with our lives. Like, but we're not going to do that because that's not how children act, right? That children are like, but my toys. If we do that, that means my big World War II sized truck won't get made. If we do that, that means I won't be able to drive around whenever I want, right? Just the most pathetically childish worldview that exists, but it's extremely popular, and there's a reason for it because our entire society is focused on that. On just being children as often as possible. Like, I would say if I had to peg it, I think that we're probably 8. I think that we're probably 8 years old as a people. I think that's the average mental age right now across the board is 8. And if you want to actually talk more seriously than 8, then they basically just scoff at you with this kind of like, girls are gross though, and that's it. Like, that's it. Like, it's wild. It's basically that, says Eric. JP is a climate denier. RFK isn't, but they agree that there is too much government. They say the free market is the solution. The very thing responsible for causing the problem is the way to solve the problem. The sad part about JP grifting, you have conservative reporting that he was right and people are being jailed. Yeah, Matt Walsh documentary has a segment on that. The documentary, right? One of these days, I'll actually sit down and watch this train wreck of what is a woman? I'm just asking questions. If you go to the Wikipedia page and scroll down to the concept sections, it explains better. I just closed the thing, dude. Hey Lou, how you doing, bud? SVBG, good to see you. Where a so-called transphobe called in because he was jailed by the NB for his refusal to use the proper pronouns to his son. But here's the thing, Eric, with this kind of stuff, right? with this kind of stuff is that they always omit the actual thing, right? Is that if you actually dug into the story and you actually looked into it, you'd probably find out that he was actually jailed for like punching the guy, right? Like that's usually how this stuff goes. That he'll be there. I was put in prison because they wouldn't let me. I was not use the proper pronouns, and then you find out that like he wasn't using the proper pronouns, and so he and his son got into a fist fight in a pub or something, right? Like this is actually how these things actually go. That like nobody is going, you're not using the right pronouns, we're putting you in prison for that. Off to trans jail. Like what? It's a joke. Like it's a joke, and it's always the case, like 100% of the time, that it's like, yeah, I mean, I did punch him, but you know, I was because. Like omitting facts and evidence is what conservatives do. It's how they communicate, right? Because they're constantly building narratives that exist outside of reality, and those narratives consistently make them look good, right? Oh, we ascended the meritocracy. We're here because we're super smart. You know, just nonsense. One of the big story points for Stalker was based on the new sphere. The new sphere. SVBG writes, also the idea that sitting and thinking about how to make things better would have no effect is silly. You get 20 people in a room all meditating for less crime. There's also going to be chat about it. Yeah, like if you want to put it in a more secular sort of way, if you want to think about it very like in that kind of straightforward sort of way, like yeah, like if everybody were to sit down and think about crime for half hour a day, like that would probably reduce crime, right? People would have their minds more set or more thinking more about crime, right? I just think, like, more or less, like, I think it's a good idea. Like, everybody should, we should all sit down and think about what it is we're doing, right, as a people. One of the things that I think is really beneficial about this channel and what we're doing is that that's essentially what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to create a space where we can all sit down and actually think about what the fuck we're doing. Like, don't you think it's ridiculous what we're doing? Don't you think this whole thing is just the stupidest goddamn thing you've ever seen any creature anywhere do? Like, I watch nature documentaries, and I think, like, I look at what the grizzlies are up to, and I look at what the eagles are up to, and I look at what the penguins are up to, and I look at all the other animals, and I'm like, okay, that's what you're up to. And some of the stuff that they're doing is crazy. Like, some of it's wild. But not one of them is using an imagined currency that they created themselves in order to destroy their own ecosystem. Like, it's wild. Like, it's wild. If this was being narrated by David Attenborough, he'd be like, strangely, the human is actively working to destroy itself. Like, because that's what we're doing. Like, and it's active at this point. Like, it's not passive. We are actively working to destroy ourselves at this point. That the fossil fuel industry themselves completely know and understand that what they're doing is destroying us. They completely know it. They completely understand it. They've admitted it. We see that they have admitted it. And they're doing it anyway. And ramping it up, in fact. Because why? To get little pieces of paper they print. They printed it themselves. Right? But so we've fallen for this absolute ridiculous religious ideology that is indefensible at this point. Like, it's incredibly insane what it is that we're actually doing. And the whole thing basically does boil down to, let's burn our children for money we printed for ourselves. Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yep, we put 10 zeros behind this one, and every so often we add a zero behind the one. And we are going to burn our children down for those zeros. So literally nothing. Literally nothing. And it is what we're doing. Like, and that's the thing that's crazy, is that, like, when I say it like that, in this mocking kind of way, in this mocking kind of tone, and all of this kind of stuff, like, it's so wild because it sounds like it should be hyperbolic. Like, it sounds like it should be a parody. It sounds like it should be like a culture from, like, a Rick and Morty skit or something. That they, like, go to, like, a planet, and there's this ridiculous group of people who are literally massacring their own children and their own futures for zeros that they put onto a screen. Like, that's exactly what it seems like, but it's what's happening. And in a very clear one-to-one kind of a way. That, like, literally we have a financial institution that is responsible for printing the currency, right? And the entire society has structured itself on something called the profit motive, which is getting these dollars that this institution prints. And we've shown that we're willing to destroy everything for it. It's crazy. What is this if not a death cult? What is this if not a crazy religious ideology? Right? Like it's completely out of hand, and more or less, I think it's completely based on the fact that we're essentially monkeys. All we know is dollars mean stuff. Dollars mean stuff, and we have no perception at all at the highest possible levels, including the people who are responsible for maintaining the currency itself. Have never, ever, under any circumstances, do they actually step back and look at a meta picture of it. They never step back and actually go like, oh, okay, like, what is this going to mean? And their principles are basically just get more money. You just need to work harder. Like, this is a religious ideology. It's a religious cult, and it's not actually interested in building a society. It's not actually interested in looking at people and saying, like, yeah, we should make this place good for humans. Because if it was interested in doing that, they would just give money to people. It would just be like, yeah, we have a market. We built this whole a market system. So instead of withholding access to it through this currency that we print, we'll just give it to people. Oh, but you need to earn it. You got to earn it. Just like those billionaires that were born billionaires. They earned it. Elon Musk is a genius because he was born a billionaire to an apartheid miner. Genius! Like, I don't know how anybody can take this seriously anymore. Like, we're such a absurd loser group of people. Just, like, manically insane. Eric writes, honestly speaking, the collective consciousness demonstrates how our spirituality is important, and Marxist worldview of materialism lacks that important part of our human nature. I don't mean that materialist philosophy isn't important, but that material worldview isn't compatible to understand our spiritual nature. I think that the materialist aspect of it is super crucial. That without the materialist aspect of it, you can just live in a fantasy world. That Marxism without, like, the materialist worldview without that tip over into spirituality will only get you so far. But the spiritualist worldview without the materialist rooting will get you nowhere. You'll literally be talking about, like, Thanos and shit. Like, you're literally just going to be like, how many angels do stand on the head of a pin? If you're not actually discussing, like, how much grain can we get? Why is everybody working so hard? Like, why is everybody working so hard when everybody can be fed and everybody can have access to food and clothing and shelter? Like, we've got all of this stuff. Why are we withholding it from people? And if you have everybody being like, but the crystals aligning the planet sphere, like, you got to root yourself in a material world, because it is a material world. And there are material consequences for the decisions that we make. And if you sever that, if you disconnect it, then you can go talk about whatever you like. The blood of the lamb will heal the sinners, like all that kind of talk, right? You could just get into that territory and just believe that everybody has been righteously chosen to be in the position that they are, because it's all just the word of God, right? You can believe that, and people do, and people have for thousands of years. Just huge civilizations of people thinking and talking this way, and it's just because, like, humans don't want to deal with reality most of the time, it looks like. Anyone who says material is definitely all that exists is going too far. It's all we can confirm exists. Yeah, and I mean, this reality is, I think it would be too far for a person to ever say that they actually know what's going on. Right? Like, this is the best that we can do. This is the best that we can do. Eric says, the part that I find ridiculous is Vietnam banning the movie. What movie are you talking about, bud? The 9-dash line where historian said, I can't believe that I have to talk about the geopolitical... Oh, I see. Vietnam banned the movie, and a historian says, I can't believe I have to talk about the geopolitical ramifications of a Barbie movie. Yeah. It's just the childish culture, right? Conclusion, those 8 dot line, not 8 dot line. Okay. I don't even know what you're talking about here with the 8 dot, 9 dot. I don't know what that is. Yeah, conservatives are also attacking the movie on that front for a children drawing. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Epstein didn't do the thing. Thank you, SVBG. Always good to remind people. CR Strifey. Margot Robbie would have to take off way more clothes for the movie to distract me from what's going on. Yeah, I mean, like, even that, though. Like, she could try, I guess. I don't know. I guess I'm too old now. And I'm just like, okay. Like, oh no, anatomy. Like, you really are talking to a guy, like, I think you're hitting on something that really indicates like something about what I consider to be the most childish thing that we do as a people, which is how embarrassed we are about sex and tits and dicks and butts. Like we're desperately embarrassed about it, right? For all of our like big highfalutin flaunting and like all of our rap stars and everything are like shaking their booty and all this kind of stuff. Like if a nipple falls out, it's the end of the goddamn world, right? And it's childish. Like when there was the wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl, where Jackson had her breast revealed, and everybody like lost their mind. I'm just like, even at the time, I was like, what are we, babies? Like what are we, little kids? Like who gives a shit? Like maybe at most you could have like a little like ooh about it. But, like, the idea that it explodes into this big fervor and they all have to make apologies and statements and all this kind of stuff. Like, what's crazy to me is that if you play a game like Mortal Kombat, you can literally watch the most grotesque acts a person can do against another person. But if in the background there was a topless woman, or, heaven forbid, a guy with his dick out, that would be the scandal. It's childish. It's childish. We have an extremely childish view of our own sexuality. We have an extremely childish view of nudity. We're extremely disconnected as a people from each other, from discussing this subject with any even remote anything remotely close to an adult conversation. Right? Like, and the whole idea that, like, we're desperately trying to, like, convince people that, like, maybe we should have sexual education in classes. And people are just, like, clutching their pearls and, like, whoa, my goodness, we can't possibly tell people. It's baby talk. It's just baby talk. Radio, good to see you, bud. Pittsburgh dude, but 8-year-olds can't drive. I meant mental capacity. Pittsburgh dude. Wait a minute, John. I found a flaw in your reasoning here, bud. You're saying that our culture is about 8 years old, but 8-year-olds can't drive, and I see people driving all over the place. So checkmate. Checkmate. Thanks, Pittsburgh dude. Materialism Marxism is not totally hostile to spirituality, but I agree that it leaves a lot on the table. You can kind of shoehorn the supernatural into superstructure. Yeah, I mean, because it's not what Marxism's about. Like, it doesn't exclude it, but it definitely is like, yeah, but we're gonna have a conversation about things that are tangible and real, right? Like we're here to talk about like tools, the means of production, how do things get made. Right? How does food get developed? Like, how does that happen? That's what the subject's about. Jesse Gender has a 6-hour rebuttal. Oh my God. See, this is kind of the thing, Eric. The reason why I don't go too deep into that subject is because I knew, and I know that there are going to be other people who are more entrenched in it. Like I'm a straight white dude. Like I consider myself an ally. I have transgender people in my life, right? Friends and coworkers that are transgender who are around me, and I will fight for them and all of this. But when it comes time to actually be like, oh hey, here's a transphobe making a documentary, like I'm not the guy. Like, it's not me. Like I'm not the one who's gonna stand up and be like. Like I'm gonna a trans person, Jesse Gender, is going to do that, and I'm gonna follow. This is something that I think is really indicative of our culture, is that we don't want to follow anybody. Not really. We all want to be, I'm an independent individual, individualizing my individualism. And it's like, yeah, but you're not. Like, you're not. Like, there are experts. There are people who are better positioned. And there are people who should, like, we should let trans people totally dunk on Matt Walsh. Like, Matt Walsh is a fucking creepy little weirdo fascist who keeps saying the creepiest weirdo shit you ever heard, right? Isn't it really, really creepy and weird that this guy is like, girls when they're 12 are the most sexually virulent? Like, why are you even talking about it, bro? Why are you even bringing it up? The creepy, weird thing that's going on right now on the right wing is, slavery benefited the slaves too, It gave them lots of skills, That if it wasn't for slavery, those black people would never know how to weave cotton. They earned a skill. Those slaves, so they benefited from slavery without a doubt. Absolutely, it's creepy. It's creepy and weird, and the people that are doing it are creepy weirdos, and should be called creepy weirdos. Like, why are you even talking about it? Like, what? Even if you think it's true, even if you're sitting there being like, well, there were, people did, we taught them skills and stuff, Shut up. Like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Bringing that up and even talking about it. Like, it's weird. This like slavery apologetics that's going on. It's creepy as creepy can get. And I think you just got to be like real. Like, I think there's only two things that can be really thought of with that. Which, thing number one, you are just coping. You are just living in this, like, but slavery couldn't have been that bad, right? Slavery could have been bad. It's a good things could happen in slavery, and we can all be friends, and everything was totally fine, wasn't it? I just don't think my ancestors could have done that. It's so difficult to, I don't even know if I can believe what's going on. Oh my goodness, so slavery could have been so bad, Like, it's got to be either that, or it's a bunch of Nazis looking at one another, being like, yeah, slavery wasn't that bad, So when we reinstitute slavery, you should thank us. It's more or less the two sides of that coin. So you're either completely detached, just coping, attempting to deal with the reality of what slavery actually means, or you're like a Nazi signaling to other Nazis your intent to reinstitute slavery. Pretty straightforward in my view. In either case, I think it's creepy as shit. It's the creepiest, weirdest shit I've ever seen. Yeah. To actually speak to what Eric was writing, though, Jesse Gender has a 6-hour rebuttal to Matt Walsh's documentary, and you are 100%. Yeah, they completely omitted what actually occurred. Of course, Matt Walsh is a disingenuous liar. He's a fascist. He admits he's a fascist. He's not going to tell you the truth. The only reasons fascists talk is to terrorize and organize. That's the only reason fascists talk, right? That's why platforming fascists under this idea of good speech beats bad speech is naive and, here it is again, childish. You cannot allow and platform Nazis and fascists because they're not talking in order to enter the free market of ideas and have their ideas challenged and ultimately defeated by good speech. It's not what they're doing. They are talking to terrorize people, to put the fear of God into them, and to let them know that we're going to come and kick your doors in, or to find other people who are willing to organize along those lines. It's the only reason they're talking. And Matt Walsh's documentary is exactly that. That it's not interested in, well, what is actually going on with these trans people? Now, wait a minute. Here I am, an honest, God-fearing Christian man, and all of a sudden you're telling me that there are people out there in the world who to me look to be men, but say that they're women? Well, I'm gonna get down to the bottom of this, and you know what I'm gonna go do? I'm gonna go talk to the professionals. I'm going to go talk to the experts in the field, and I'm going to sit in front of them. We're going to put down a camera, and I'm going to ask them honest questions and try to get an honest response to really sort this through. And I'm going to make a film to show to my peers and show to everybody around me. Well, this is what the experts are saying, and this is what's going on, and sussing it out so that we can all come to an understanding together as a people well, what the heck is actually going on with all these trans people, right? You think that's what they're doing? You think that's how they're thinking? Right? No. They're thinking, we got to find a way to fuck these trans people up. We got to find a way to convince the wider populace to let us start kicking in doors and rounding these trans people up. How do we get it so that we get enough force to actually start beating the shit out of and lynching these people again? How do we make it so that these people will be so placated and so distracted and so overwhelmed or even a little bit on our side? Even a little bit like, oh, well, we should listen to both sides, all that kind of stuff. So that when we start lynching these people publicly and making legislation to make their lives a living hell, they won't do anything about it. I know what. I'll tell a bunch of lies in a documentary that looks good, but is actually full of total shit. Which one of those two stories do you actually think Matt Walsh is following? Which one of those two stories do you think a guy like Matt Walsh is actually going like, yeah, like, and you can tell right off the hop. The title of the movie is What is a Woman? Who gives a shit what Matt Walsh's opinion is about what is a woman? Who cares what Matt Walsh thinks about women? What's convinced anyone that Matt Walsh is an expert on what women are? The fact that he didn't name it What is a Man tells you everything you need to know about who Matt Walsh is. He's a coward. He's a liar. He's delusional, and he's a fascist. He's a little creep, a weird little pedophile, and anybody who actually is going to stand in front of me and be like, well, Matt Walsh has some interesting points. Yeah, you're either a complete and total dupe, or you're probably just a fascist little weirdo. You get to pick which one you'd like to be. Anyone have any advice for a trans woman looking for a career? My daughter's friend is looking for a career and can't figure out what to do. She's very nervous about hostility in the workplace. Bro, this whole thing's coming apart. Like it's hard enough for straight people to get careers. It's hard enough for just like straight white men to get careers. Like this whole thing is fucking tearing itself apart. It's a little sad, but the larger company, the more likely they will support her. That is actually the truth, because it's become like a little flag, right? Like it's become a little flag, and they can always like point at the trans person and be like, "Look, we're not psychopaths. We have a trans person. We here at Evil Corp 10,000. Sure, we went through that scandal where we were draining baby blood and using slaves in our chocolate mines." Sure, we went through that scandal, but look, it's a trans person. So we're not all bad. We'll change our logo to the trans flag. Work harder, chocolate slave miners, for trans people. Yeah, fossil fuels are as bad as cigarettes or worse on knowing how bad their products are. Absolutely. Like, absolutely. And what's crazy, guys, like, there is going to be a reckoning, right? Like, one way or another, there is going to be a reckoning. Like, you don't do this shit. You don't just get away with this shit, right? Like, maybe the head honcho guy at the very top of the thing ends up dying in his deathbed or something like that, right? But his company, right, the people who are involved in it, the organizational structure of it, like, there is going to be a reckoning. And a big part of that reckoning is going to be stuff like, you don't get this shit with nothing happening, right? Like this, you don't have this kind of stuff occur. Like the water levels are coming up, you guys. Like it's coming in our lifetime, and it's coming faster than you would like, where the New York City subway system is not going to be usable, right? Like that kind of thing. Where all of the sudden stuff that we just assumed existed forever and that we were all just benefiting from naturally is just not going to exist anymore, right? New York's a big one, right? Like major sections of New York City are going to be underwater, and it's coming, and it's going to come fast, right? A lot faster than you think it's going to come, especially with these. Like, look at this thing, man. Like, look at these charts. Look at this stuff, right? Like, boom. And this is going to become the new normal. Right? And it's going to get hotter, and it's going to happen faster, and it's going to just continuously feed back on itself, and the heat's just going to go, and we're going to have a year where sections of the United States are going to be uninhabitable over the summer, where we'll just be like, yeah, if you're living in Texas, right? If you're living in Texas in the summer, you got to move. You got to move. Or you just got to, like, do what Ben Shapiro says. You just got to turn your air conditioning on. I don't understand why everybody's getting really worried about climate change, because the climate changes, and it's normal for the climate to change. And you just need to turn your air conditioning on, Just turn your air conditioning on. Everything will be totally fine. Because I'm Ben Shapiro. I'm a super smart guy. Like, when the water levels come up, when sections of the United States are non-inhabitable for months at a time because the heat is so bad that anyone living there is not going to be able to survive out in the heat. Like, it's going to become one of these things where we're just going to be like, why are we tolerating the people responsible for this in any position of leadership whatsoever? Like, why are we tolerating, like, why are we even discussing this? Why is this even a discussion? Like, it's quite literally, I shouldn't say literally because this is explicitly a metaphor, but it is as if there is a person who's just, like, walking around in your town holding up a gun, who just, like, walks up to random people occasionally and just shoots them in the back of the head. And everybody's just, like, walking around like, oh, well, that's just Jim with the gun. That's what he does. It's what he's always done. Right? Well, we can't change the laws surrounding Jim with the gun because he's the guy that makes the rules about who gets to have the gun and who gets to shoot people. And we're just like, oh, yeah, that's a normal. You just got to deal with that. Oh, we've done the statistics, and Jim's shooting more people every day, Every day, it's more people. Every year, he's shooting more people. Well, nothing we could do about it. It's just normal. It's just natural human nature, after all. Like, that's the level of just crazy, crazy stupidity we've entered. Dude, I should make that movie. I should gather a bunch of people. It'd be super low budget. Just one guy walking around with a gun. And he's just going to be like the nicest guy, too. He's just going to be like, hey, kids, how you doing? Good to see you out there. And he's just going to walk up to some random guy on the street. And everybody's, and nobody's going to go, oh! Everybody's just going to go, oh, that's just Jim. Oh, shame about Reggie. Oh, yeah. Well, what are you going to do, Nothing you can do. It's how it goes, And everybody's just going to walk around, and it's going to be totally normal. There's going to be one kid who's going to be like, this doesn't seem normal. And everybody's going to go, oh, of course. You'll grow up soon. When you get older. You'll see. So you'll get more conservative as you age, It's like having conversations with his friends about how he doesn't think this is a regular thing, that other places don't do this, that they should get rid of it. And he's just like a dude walking around shooting, and he like tries to start figuring it out. He finds out it's all like it all goes back to just like 200 years ago. His family passed a piece of legislation saying that they could do this, and they're just like, why are we upholding this? Like, that's the level of absolute stupidity we have entered as a people. And stupid is the word. Like, it's just so fucking dumb at this point. Like, it's just so fucking dumb. Like, I can see how back in 2010, if there was somebody standing in front of me at 2010, still sort of scratching their head, being like, I don't know about this climate change stuff, I'd be like, really? Okay, bud. And I would like go through it with them. But now, here we are, 2023. All the evidence you could possibly need is right in front of your face. You're literally experiencing it on your day-to-day. And at this stage in the game, if you're denying the existence of climate change, it's because you're demented or you're bot. So you're either an evil psychopathic Nazi, Jordan Peterson, or you're just a demented, like, detached person with probably a mental illness, like Joe Biden. So you get to pick which one, right? So I think most people will choose dementia in the end of it all. They'll just be like, well, I didn't really understand what was going on. Oh. That'll really own the libs. Trusting the experts? Sheep. Yeah. Look up Barbie map on Google. You'll see the world map. Hilarious. Barbie's movie had a map that was friendly to the CCP's view of the South China Sea. Oh no. Reality. It's because at the end of the day, this talking point is actually an interesting one because, look, Hollywood knows where the wind is blowing. There's 1.5 billion people in China. They're a very prosperous people who have a lot of disposable income. Like, we should be making stuff that they want to see. Very straightforwardly. Walmart will teach customer service just through repeated failure. Moving to a specialist store would be ideal. Anything more specific than Walmart? Oh, we're talking about that. People need to read the Song of Songs of Solomon. Yeah, it's pure porn if understood in its right No, not if it's understood in its right context. What are you talking about? Look, I got my Bible right here. Song of Solomon, dude. Deuteronomy, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is the one that I recommend. But Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon comes after. Yep, there it is. It's just small. Bro, look, you don't need context for this, okay? Song of Solomon. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, chapter 1. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is perfume poured out. Therefore the maidens love you. Draw me after you. Let us make haste. The king has brought me into his chambers. We will exult and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly, they do love you. Shall I continue? You don't need context for this, man. You don't need context. Straight up from the hop, it's we be fucking. Hey, we went up to the king's chamber. Your anointing oils smell real nice. Huh? Like, come on. Come on, man. Like, where do you think this is going? Grinning says, UPS got a contract. The Teamsters are busy trying to sell it to the members. It'll probably go through, sure. I mean, there are positive stories. Like, here's a good positive story. France becomes the first country to force all supermarkets to give unsold food to the needy. There's a extremely obvious thing that we should already be definitely doing. That the idea that we're literally just throwing food into garbage bins tells you that we're a ridiculous people. Like, it's just ridiculous who we are. Lots of work in forest firefighting. Hey, that's right. Capitalism opening up new markets everywhere, Lou. Right? There'll be big firefighting opportunities, right? Having trouble breathing the air? Try our new air masks. They'll convert the toxic fumes into breathable air for you and your children so you can still enjoy living outside for a moment. That UV radiation burning your skin? There's your capitalist innovation right there. That's what they've been talking about this whole time. I have to say that Jesse Gender's rebuttal has so many interesting points that help me understand our cultural issue. For example, debate over trans issue is all related to sexism and racism. Oh yeah, of course. Look, the reason why the fascists are going after trans people is because there's not a lot of them. They represent like 0.6% of the population. There's not a lot of them. They're not very well organized, and they don't have that many allies, right? So they're weak, right? So the fascists are going after them because they're weak. And it is that simple. Fascists are like one step away from a rabid dog. Like they just like they want to find a group to lynch, and the group to lynch right now are trans people. They're weak, and it's a good issue to organize on because they don't have that many allies, so there's not that many people standing up to defend them, right? And so it's a good opportunity for all these fascists and Nazis to all find themselves and get into the same room to crush this small, weak group so that they can go after a bigger fish, which is the point. Right? Which is the point. That's the whole goal for these guys. And there's no reason to pretend like it isn't. Yep, the trans debate has all the same points as the white supremacy debate. Isaac writes, I'm not homophobic, but I don't think a child watching up bombers dropping bombs with trans flags in space in Afghanistan cares about... Yeah, honestly, like, this is the big thing that I have to say about, like, the gay rights movement on a whole, is that they haven't taken an anti-imperialist position, and so it's going to backfire. Like, it's backfiring internationally. That the West is basically saying, it's okay to be gay, while dropping bombs on people, and the rest of the world is responding with, maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't okay to be gay. Like, you put the pride flag on the side of your bomber and killed my children with it. Like, maybe it's not okay to be gay. And, like, any civil rights movement of any kind needs to be explicitly anti-imperialist. Like, explicitly, like, it needs to be, like, point 1 or 2 of the manifesto. And if you're not, like, if you're just going to let the empire adopt your iconography and then kill people with it, don't be too surprised when the rest of the world rejects it, which is exactly what's happening, right? That there are sections of the world, like Cuba recently updated its civil code to allow for gay unions and things like this. But don't be too surprised if a place like Russia, which is fairly homophobic generally, doesn't just go, yeah, look what happened in America, right? They all walked around saying it's okay to be gay, and now they started a war on our border. Like, and of course that doesn't, like, make rational sense, but that's not the point. I hate it when it jumps down like that. Even the concept of gender segregation in sports actually stems from women beating men in sports. So the conservatives ban them and use the myth that women are weaker than men. Yeah, like, I don't really buy into this idea that, like, men and women should be segregated. That, like, usually whenever I watch, like, what was the one I watched recently? They were like, they did a race. They did a race of women against men, and the men absolutely defeated the women. And I was like, yeah, because you took, like, big, tall, lean men who were, like, 6'5", and put them up against women who were, like, 5 feet tall. Yeah, the men are going to win that race. Like, that, yes. But what would happen if you took a man who was also 5 feet tall, right? That the issue, as I see it, is more one of, like, weight classes. Actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson brought this up, and I agree with it. Like, if you had people of equal weights and heights competing against one another, and those were the lines by which you were drawing them, and there was no segregation whatsoever, well, what would that actually look like? Right? What would that actually look like? Of course, that had never happened in our society. It's too entrenched. Men don't want to compete with women. Like, they just don't. I condescend to speak with Christians in biblical frame. To me, it's just fingernails on a chalkboard. Yeah. I mean, it actually gets kind of fun to talk to Christians. Like, when you actually read the Bible and you actually learn something about the Bible and then you actually talk to Christians about the Bible, it becomes pretty quick that they have no fucking idea what they're talking about. Like, for real. Like, and it's not like it's a hard read. Like, it's not the most difficult read you've ever read in your life. You know? It's just like, you have to actually do it. John, fellow travelers released a 3-hour documentary on the DPRK, if you're interested. I might actually put that on. That actually sounds really interesting. I would like to know more about the DPRK. I'm not that knowledgeable, and I'd like to get a little bit more knowledgeable. I know enough about Korea to know that our opinions of them are essentially illegitimate. Like, you don't really get to have a critical opinion of North Korea or even South Korea, given the history of Western intervention there. You don't really get to stand up in front of me and be like, these North Koreans, they'd be better off if... Shut up. Like, your society leveled them. Like, just drop bombs on them. Like, what makes you think you have any credibility to actually be able to say anything about it? And I know enough about the subject to be able to say that. To basically just be able to, like, who gives a shit what you think? Straight up. Like, if I was somebody living in North Korea and some American started to talk about my country, I would just be like, who are you? Like, why should anyone care what you think, you illiterate, drunken, fat dumbass? Like, it's just gotten to that point where we're like, and the entire rest of the world is waking up to this. The entire rest of the world is putting two and two together and just being like, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't tolerate these Americans. Like, we probably just shouldn't. Like, whenever an American shows up, we should isolate them. We should put them in a little corner and just be like, okay, haha, yeah, America number one, you bet, haha, right? Just put them in a little corner, forget about them. Well, there is the poem where it says how fascists start small and don't stop until everyone is gone. Yep. That's the method, man. Like, that's the method, man. Like, and we were talking earlier about collective consciousness. Well, that collective consciousness can become fascist, right? Like, I think that's something that's important to understand, and why I think it's important for us to actively think about the collective consciousness and actually think about how we interact in that collective consciousness, and why we need to continue to think about these things in the larger space, is because the collective consciousness can become fascist. And in my view, in America, is becoming fascist. That fascism is very popular. It's a very popular worldview. That neoliberalism, in many ways, is a rebranding of fascism. That the only thing that neoliberalism didn't adopt from fascism is its racial positioning. So if you take all of the ideas of privatization that come out of fascism, if you take the economics of fascism, right, and then you distill it of the ethnic and racial positioning, you end up with neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is fascism minus racism, basically. Well, not minus racism, because neoliberalism is still quite racist, but it seems to be that that's the case. That as long as we get what we want economically, we don't really care if we don't really care about the ethnic or racial issues so much. Yeah, quoting the Bible to Christians is one of my favorite pastimes. Endless joy. Yeah, the Bible literally says the tithes are to feed the people in need. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. You don't even need to go to, like, Malachi, dude. Jesus Christ walks around saying, give your money to the poor. Like, this is the number one thing. How do you know a guy like Jordan Peterson is a total fraud? Like, a total fraud. Well, he walks around saying, our civilization is based on Judeo-Christian principles, and Judeo-Christian principles need to be upheld. Well, he doesn't give a shit about Jesus. He doesn't care even for a moment about Christ. Because Jesus Christ was walking around saying, give your money to the poor. And every single time Peterson is confronted with, hey, should we give money to the poor? Well, you can't just shove money down the hierarchy. It's not that easy. It doesn't really solve any of the problems. So it's a bunch of apologetics that at the end of the day completely counters his own Christ. So here's a guy who pretends to be a Christian, who explicitly despises Christ, that if Christ were standing in front of him saying the things that Christ said, Jordan Peterson would go, I don't think so. So, in what way is this guy a Christian? He doesn't give a shit about Christ at all. And I think that this is true more or less across the board. That all of these quote-unquote Christians are just frauds. They're just total deluded losers who just want to be part of an in-group. They've got a little club right? It calls itself a Christian club. It's like, we're the Southern Baptists. We're the Northern Evangelicals. We're the Anglicans, right? We're this group. We're that group. So it's a little boys club, right? It's a little community center group where they all get to go together, but they don't actually give a shit about the Bible, and they don't give a shit about Christ, certainly. Right? Because if they did, what would they be doing? They'd be giving their money to the poor, and they'd be demanding that their political groups give money to the poor, and they'd be demanding restitution. They'd be demanding it. Right? It wouldn't be them going, you know what would be great? It would be them going, do this. Do this. They would be starting coalitions. They would be starting groups. They would actually be following the words of their own Christ, but they don't care about Christ. There isn't a single Christian fucking out there that cares about Christ. And it's gotten so bad at this point that if you actually do read the book and you think, this Christ, he's got a little something going on, the last thing you want to call yourself is a Christian. It's the last thing you want to call yourself. Because the Christians and the Christian organizations that exist in the society are the antithesis of Christianity. And if you walk around calling yourself a Christian, everyone's just going to think you're a fraud like they are. So you shouldn't. Eric says, I remember there was an old show that I used to watch called Sports Science. And one of the episodes, they literally tested women's boxer versus men boxer with the same weight and height. And the woman was able to generate more force with her punch than what a man could. Interesting. Like, yeah, this is the thing that doesn't get talked about, right? It's weight classes, right? It's weight classes. Like, there's a reason why there are weight classes in boxing. There's a reason why that exists. But there's no weight classes in something like racing. It's just get the biggest, strongest, tallest person you can find. Well, that is going to be a man, right? And so there is sort of this imbalance that exists. But, like, if you actually were like, well, what if we had weight classes in racing? What if we actually said, like, or height, or any kind of measurement whatsoever, right? That would probably change the dynamic. Capitalism and fascism, friends forever and ever. Thanks, Methane. Peterson doesn't even like to call himself a Christian. Well, he's not, so I don't understand why he doesn't. I don't even understand why he talks about Judeo-Christian values. Like, he doesn't give a shit about that. Even when saying values are good and spirituality, it's uber important. Like, I think the big reason why he doesn't explicitly call himself a Christian is because he would understand very quickly that he would be considered a fraud. Like, a heretic of the highest level. Like, the guy literally refuses to acknowledge that give money to the poor is a point of Christianity. Like a major talking point. How about a daily Bible verse illustrating the communism of Christ? I don't know if that would be a popular segment, Radio Halifax. I mean, you could basically just flip the Bible. Like, the thing is a communist manifesto. Like, the whole thing, the whole of this text, right, the entirety of the Bible truly is like the great commandment. Like, what's Christ's great commandment? And this is something that the critics of Christianity and the atheists don't like to acknowledge, is that the entire text is to be understood through what's called the Great Commandment. And that is, love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Even if they're black, even if they're trans, love your neighbor as yourself. And that everything that you read in this book is to be understood through that lens. And so these guys that are walking around decontextualizing and lifting stuff out, right, they're just refusing to actually acknowledge that that's the whole point of the thing, right? It's to try to find a way and try to find a path to thinking of the world outside of your own perception. That's really what it's all about. Like, that's the pursuit of all religions, and that is the religious pursuit. That anytime anybody sits down and writes any text that could be considered religious of any sort, it's because they're trying to get the listener or the viewer to think of themselves outside of themselves, and think of being in another person's shoes, in another perception. They're trying to elevate the imagination of the person so that they can actually think of something other than themselves. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. Like, and these modern Christians don't give a shit about doing that at all. Yeah, conservatives hate when I show the story and say they should advocate for debt forgiveness. Yeah, because they hate Christ. They despise Christ. And they despise the Bible. Like, really clearly. Like it's very, very clear that that's the case. Like you don't need to create a huge argument for it. Like it's gotten very, very clear that especially modern conservatives, like the modern conservatives' allegiance to Donald Trump is like the allegiance to Donald Trump is makes it really plain. Like they don't care whatsoever about their Christ. They care about power, right? They care about using that power to inflict suffering on other people. Like real straightforward stuff. Jahone, how you doing, bud? Loving at the time meant something different, like how a father who beats his kids thinks he loves his kids. That quote is out of the cultural context. What quote? You mean the Great Commandment? Like is because that quote is essentially what's considered the golden rule. That every religion has at some point a statement that is essentially that you should think of the world through somebody else's perception. And of course, like what love means different things to different people in different periods of time. Right? Obviously. Like it's a moving target. Because it wasn't unloving to own slaves, beat them, own women, beat them. Right. Like the Bible is a product of its time. Like I'm not actually sure I understand your point, bud. Like, so we shouldn't try to love your neighbor as yourself. Is that your point? Like I actually don't understand your point. Like the history of humanity is one of constant evolution and change over time. And the people who existed within the state of slavery were trying to find a way to develop humanity and trying to find a way to get away from these things, right? Like they were trying to find a way to raise the social consciousness, to raise the collective consciousness, and to raise the idea, right? So I actually don't know what your point is, because like should they not have tried to do that? Should they just have looked at people who were beating their wives and beating slaves and things like this and just remain silent? Is that sort of the point? I don't really know what you're trying to drive towards. Eric writes, I actually know the reason why JP talks about Christianity is because he's an occultist. Yeah. The occult was very prevalent with Nazism, and the occult loved to talk about Christianity, but not in a satanic way. Oh, yeah. The Nazis were very Christian. Like, they were very Christian. They loved talking about the Bible and Christianity. Not saying that we shouldn't love people, just saying that the hatred at the time wasn't at odds with loving people. Like, allowing to own slaves isn't an anti-communist and anti-socialist thought. I mean, it explicitly is. Like, the very concept of something like communism and socialism is anti-slavery from its inception. That, like I understand that, like, there was a social condition during the writing of the Bible in which slavery existed, and that the slave culture was fought against by the people themselves, right? Like, that's definitely true. Like, the servile wars themselves should show you that the slaves themselves were not necessarily... Like, Rome was an empire. Rome was this huge, massive, sprawling empire that was largely fueled by the economic principles of slavery, for which the slaves themselves were constantly falling into rebellion and constantly fighting against. The story of Spartacus should show you that that's the case. And that the institution of slavery was not a popular one. It was popular amongst the people who were the best trained fighters, right? The army. And and under Spartacus, there was a real chance that the slaves would actually have won that, right? Like one of the things that I think is really, really, really crucial to understanding the New Testament, and the Bible broadly, but the New Testament certainly, is that it's written during a time when the best chance at a real slave rebellion had been crushed. Like, I think that's really, really crucial to important to understand. Like, that if you don't really understand that the slave rebellion had been tried, well organized, well structured. Like, Spartacus was no joke. Like, Spartacus was a real military leader who was leading well organized fighters to fight in conflict, right? And they lost. And it was such a threat to the Roman Empire that they actually crucified like thousands of these guys along the Agrippa Way, which is the major port in Rome. So when you were a new slave coming into Rome, you got to walk down the street where there's all these crosses, and you get to hear the story of Spartacus, and you get to hear all that kind of stuff. No, the Bible is absolutely inherently socialist. It's just written during a period when slavery has been is the dominant economic system. Like, Christ was executed by capitalists, man. Like, straight up. Like, Christ is executed because he goes to a temple, right? He goes to a temple, and what are they doing in the temple? They are forcing poor people, so they're creating false scarcity. They're forcing people to buy the animals that are at the temple, right? These profiteers are saying, your sacrifice is no good. You're bringing in doves or pigs or whatever it is you're bringing to the temple, abiding by the law of the land. And we are telling you, outside of the law, right? It was the people who were profiteering at the temple who were breaking the law, that no, that's no good. You have to purchase our animals, and of course at an extravagant price, because they created false scarcity. And so what does Christ do? He walks in there and chases these guys out. He takes a fucking whip and he whips at them, overturns their shit, and chases them out, right? Which is exactly what any actual person who is supposed to uphold the law would have done. Like, if a cop was in the room and the cop was following the law, that's exactly what he would have done. He would have chased these profiteers out, probably arrested them, right? Confiscated their shit. And this is what leads to Christ's crucifixion. Because this is the moment when the leaders of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the other Jewish groups that were against Christ's idea of helping the poor actually go and get him. They go and get him, and they drag him in front of Pontius Pilate, right? They plomp him down in front of Pontius Pilate, and they say, we want to crucify this guy. Pontius Pilate acknowledges that he sees that Christ has done nothing wrong. He acknowledges it. He even gives the people the opportunity to pick between Christ and Barabbas in order to, which one of these do you want freed? And Barabbas is a real criminal, an actual criminal, and they choose Barabbas, right, to really illustrate the corruption of the society. And then finally, Pontius Pilate doesn't make a declaration in order to crucify Christ. He just washes his hands of it. And so Christ's crucifixion is actually an illegal crucifixion. That it's just a bunch of rabble crucifying a guy, and it's not even within the laws of the Roman state, and so Christ's enemies, which is explicitly a profiteering capitalist class, explicitly, like, capitalism doesn't exist as an economic system at this point, but the whole idea of what they are is very much wealth and prosperity for themselves, right? Making fun of the poor, all of these sorts of things that we see as ubiquitous in our own society, and them taking Christ and crucifying him. And that's the fucking story. That's the story. And just because it wasn't written today, just because it was written in an environment where slavery was real and it existed and it persisted as an economic structure, doesn't make it any less of a pro-socialist or a pro-communist document. I would say he wanted to be hospitable to the poor, but he was a monarchist. I mean, look, if your critique is that Jesus Christ didn't read Marx, like, I don't know what to say to you, dude. A lot of arguments he's making are also because he saw the quickly approaching coming of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Like, I would say that a lot of not literal as in real, but literal as in, like, fictional narrative Like, you got to remember who this book is written for, right? The story is largely written for a people who are more or less disillusioned with the empire and who are trying to find a way to express themselves culturally, right? Like, if you're a follower of the pantheons, right? If you know the stories of Dionysus and you hear the story of Christ, you see the correlation, like pretty much on a 1-to-1 level. Like the story of Christ turning water into wine, right? Like the Christ's death and resurrection is a Dionysian story. That Christ in many ways is a Dionysian figure, but he's not the only one, right? There are other gods and who share similar attributes, and it's pretty clear that the writers of the story of Christ are trying to amalgamate many different stories under one umbrella. Like, it's pretty clear that that's happening. And they're doing so in order to try to advance the society culturally away from this insane death cult. Like, the Roman Empire is insane. Like, it's this wild madhouse of just absolute barbarity. And if you want to actually try to advance a culture, he was an apocalypticist. I mean, it's easy to see that, like, it's easy to create an argument that that we're in kind of an end time state when you're living in the Roman Empire. He preached an impending end to the reign of man and the reign of God coming. Yeah, I mean, always a very popular message. Money wasn't necessarily going to matter then. Again, not saying he didn't say anything anti-cap, but like I just feel like Jehoni, it just feels like you want to criticize this book, or you want to criticize what's going on without actually placing it where it actually belongs, which was written 2,000 years ago. It's a story with cultural significance. Like, I always have this sort of criticism to people who think this way, which is you're basically ceding territory to the evangelicals. Like, just saying that there were better people at the time, like Wang Man in China freed slaves before Jesus starting his ministry. Yeah, okay. Like, I don't view that as better. You understand? Like, I view that as different. That's a completely different continent. Like, if Christ started walking towards China, it would take him a long time to get there. Like, and we're not, like, we are talking about these documents as a cultural document and how they are used today. Like, if you are talking about what's good for your personal philosophy of life, off you go then. Like, I genuinely don't care what you read. Like, if you stood up in front of me and said the Harry Potter series changed my life, I'd be like, great, fantastic, right? But, like, the Harry Potter series isn't being used to justify the passing of legislation in the halls of power today, right? The Bible is. And if that's going to be the case, then I say that we should know something about it, right? That the works of Wang Man in China are not being used to pass legislation and justified to be used as a justification for the passing of legislation today. And I think that we should know something about these texts, right? And that's simply saying, like, oh, this guy wasn't didn't read the works of Marx and doesn't have a modern liberal ethos. It doesn't mean anything. Like, it doesn't. Like, we should be able to read the works and the words of this figure and understand, like, especially when the people who are saying that this is the guy that they worship are operating completely counter to the words that he actually says. Like, to me, that's the big thing. Like, if you're going to stand up in front of me and say, Jesus is my man, I love Jesus, right? I'm going to go, okay, cool. What did this guy say? Are you acting along those lines? Right? And that's what it's about. It's not about, like, it's not about this sort of odd thing that happens in the discourse, which is assume that the frauds and the liars, what they have to say about it is true, and then talk about it as if what they said is accurate. Like that to me is the strangest thing that a person can do in regards to a discussion about the Bible. Yeah, and that's all that I'm saying. Is that like a guy like Peterson is walking around saying Judeo-Christian values, like for God's sakes, I've got something here where we've got here's a good one. You guys are going to get a chuckle out of this. Yeah. Judeo-Christian roots will ensure U.S. military AI is used ethically, General says. What are these Judeo-Christian roots? We should discuss what these Judeo-Christian roots are then. If you've got a United States military general saying we're going to use military AI ethically, okay, why? Oh, because of our Judeo-Christian roots. I think that it would be fair to ask that general, so what are our Judeo-Christian roots exactly? When you say Judeo-Christian roots, what are you talking about there, Champy? So, you know what I like to do, right? Is I like to get ahead of the conversation. And I like to grab the Bible, because if anything is Judeo-Christian, if there's any document that exists within the roots of Judeo-Christian values, it's the Bible. And I like to, give it a read. And not to give it a read to be like, this book has slavery. This book has slavery in it. Of course it has slavery in it. Of course it has slavery in it. It was written during a time when slavery was the legal economic system. Like, of course it has slavery in it. But to read what the guy actually said, like, if any words matter in this book, right? If any words matter in this book, it's the words of Christ. Why? Because the thing is called Christianity. The leader of the entire thing is Christ. And if you're not going to listen to the things that he said and do the things that he said, and talk about the things that he said, and talk about the things that he did, and try to live the life that he told you to live, if you're not going to do any of that, then you have no business calling yourself a Christian. You have no business saying that you follow Judeo-Christian values. You have no business believing in this whole Christ thing, right? And you can get to there without trying to critique the work from a modern perspective. You can accept it for what it is and still think these people are total frauds. And I actually think that is more effective. Because, Joni, I think this is my whole point. This is my whole point. Is that oftentimes, and it's the atheists that do it, it was the new atheists that really did this, right? And it's still common and it's still very prevalent. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, okay? But I am saying that there is a more effective evisceration tool. There is a more effective way of going about this. A far more effective way. That if you're looking at these Christians and you're thinking, these guys are Looney Tunes out to lunch, crazy, go nuts, right? Well, the way that the new atheists and the way that modern atheists go about it is they say, this book endorses slavery because it has slavery in it. This book is endorsing all kinds of crazy stuff. But all you're doing is playing into the hands of the people that you're critiquing, right? Because now you're in a conversation. And one that will never seek resolution. Because your critique assumes their expertise. Assumes that the things that they believe in the book are actually in the book, or that they believe it. Right? Instead, what I'm saying is that people like yourself, if you really want to eviscerate these Christians, the way to do it is to read the book, read the words of Christ, acknowledge what that those words are to be followed according to the Christians, and say, but you're not, because they're not. Because they're not. So you don't need to get into this whole, like, well, the modern moral thing and the judgment of we shouldn't be following the words of... You should begin with, you're absolutely right, Christians, people who say that they are Christians, This person, Christ, obviously is a person that we should be listening to 100%. I completely agree with you. 100%. Everyone should read the Bible and become experts in the Bible and give their money to the poor. Everybody should love their neighbor as themselves, even if they are trans or black or gay. Everybody should do that because that's what Christ said, so why don't you? Because you don't. You obviously despise this Christ. Why do you call yourself a Christian then? This, to me, is the conversation, the only conversation that anyone should be having with a Christian. If a person is going to stand up in front of you and say that they are a Christian, while simultaneously saying, no, we shouldn't give money to the poor, I'm skeptical of trans people, well, what business do they have to call themselves a Christian? They're not even trying. They're not even trying. Like, there's no such thing as a Christian in this society. They don't exist. There's just a bunch of people working in a boys' club trying to just be in an in-group. That they moved into an area and were like, well, there's the church, so I'm obviously going to go back to bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. I'm going to go walk into that church, and here's the social group, and these guys say, well, this is what we're going to do. Well, I want to be part of the social group, so I'm just going to go along with it. Grinning, thank you so much for the donation, bud. You got to go back to boring audiobooks. I've been listening to The Lord of the Rings, and I got to tell you, it's been a real treat. It's a real treat. Listening to the audiobook version of The Lord of the Rings is like listening to your grandpa tell you like a wonderful story. It's like being the son in the movie The Princess Bride. That's what it's like. That you're listening to a beautiful story your grandfather is telling you. Thank you again for your donation, bud. I appreciate it. Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, guys. Hit the bell, hit the whistle, send me around. The number one thing that you can do, okay? So technically I will ask for donations. Patreon's in the donation, but I've decided that the way that I'm going to justify myself is now that the speech I'm going to give. We all know the speech, right? I've done it a couple of times on this live stream, and I'll do it again right now. You just need to reach down into your heart and find within yourself the love and the passion of Jesus Christ to reach into your wallet and pull out $1 for Jesus Christ and give it to like that speech, right? Well, I'm not going to do it for money. I am going to ask each and every one of you to tell your friends and tell people about me. That's what I'm going to ask for. I'm not going to ask for your money, although that's not true. I will ask for your money, but I'm not going to make big speeches about it. The big speech that I'm going to do is that it's actually word of mouth now. That the system that we live under is actively suppressing people like me. People are actually banning me off platforms. People like me are getting banned off platforms. Leftists are getting banned off of these platforms. And it's the reason why people move to Rumble. It's the reason why people move around and do other things. It's the reason why people do all of this stuff. So please, the only way something like this is going to spread is if you talk about it. So please do tell. If you got a friend who's like, I'm looking for a new podcast, or I'm looking to somebody to listen to, or I'm looking at that kind of stuff, let them know about me. Show them my stuff. Let them come in here. Let them challenge me. Let them get me going on a subject that's near and dear to their heart, because that's the only way something like this is actually going to grow. And if you're here all the time, or even a little bit of the time, please consider spreading the good word. It's not about agreeing, Jehone. It's about actually having the conversations. Because that to me is the big thing, is that we're not actually having the conversations. Like, we're not actually talking about climate change. We're not actually talking about income inequality. We're not actually talking about these things, right? It's not about agreeing. It's about actually having the conversation. Jehone said, if I was arguing with a Nazi, not a great start. I would say that the early Christians were not the equivalent of Nazis. I wouldn't argue that Hitler was actually this pro-Jewish guy and that they misunderstood them, but he wasn't. I would argue that Hitler is bad and they should abandon it. Right. But like, Christ did say, give your money to the poor, and Christ did say, love your neighbor as themselves. Like, I don't really understand the comparison. people won't abandon the book. That's the other part, Jahone. Like, I think that you are living in a fantasy world. That if your position is people should abandon this book, well, good luck with that. They aren't. Like, they're not. That the people who are seizing power in the United States are not going to be swayed by somebody saying abandon the book. It's unpersuasive. So it's an unsuccessful position from its outset, which is the reason why I won't adopt it. Because I am here to be persuasive, to be convincing, to change people's minds, to get people on side with the concept of communism. And if I were to walk up to modern day Christians and say, your book is shit because of X, Y, and Z and you should abandon it, unpersuasive. I am rejected immediately. So I'm not interested in adopting unpersuasive arguments. And abandon this book that you've based your entire philosophy on is unconvincing and unpersuasive. We should become experts. We should know more about the book than they do. And that's not hard to do. It's not hard to do. Right? It's not hard to do. Yeah. Look, the Bible has been used for lots of bad things. Absolutely. Again, like, unpersuasive. I am not persuaded. And I'm not persuaded for a very simple reason. That you are essentially asking me to cede the authority to the people who to the people who are using it. Like, they're not going to. Like, they're not going to. So much for your point. Like, people should abandon it. Okay, they're not. What now? Like, what now? Right? Because you can't just walk away. Right? You can't just walk away. They're the ones seizing power. Right? They're the ones that are actually taking power in the society. So, disengagement isn't a choice. Abandonment of the text isn't a choice. So what's left? Like, if you want to get serious about this, what's left? And what's left is actually reading it, actually knowing something about it. Okay, but you're intentionally missing my point, I think. Like, and this is a common thing that I find happens with atheists and this kind of crowd, is the intentional misunderstanding of what's being said. Like, I couldn't be clearer than what I'm saying, is that Christ himself sets a precept for his expectation. He says things, and his followers aren't following those things. Like, very, very straightforwardly. Christ says, give your money to the poor. Christ says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as himself, or as yourself, rather, and you're not doing it. Very straightforwardly. You're creating some kind of other weird argument that I am not making. And I think that you're doing that because you are dedicated to this idea that humanity would be better off without the Bible. Well, too bad. Tough. But so there you go. So we agree, bud. So keep it there, because that's what I'm saying. Like, I understand. I do. Like, here, and I'll give it back to you. I can agree with it. Sure, that our culture would be better without the Bible. That we could move on to something else. Right? We could move on to something else. The book's 2,000 years old, right? Nobody's ever written anything else. Right? Nobody ever said anything else. That we could really base our society more on something like the works of Shakespeare, right? Like that the moral messaging and the moral storytelling that happens in Shakespeare is just as good, right? That there are secular stories that we could be looking at There are secular philosophies and even just like the philosophers, right? Like that we could be focusing on. We don't necessarily need to be basing our society on Judeo-Christian values or any of this kind of stuff. Like, I can agree with all of that. That's great. Fine. Tough shit. Like, tough shit. The people who are seizing power in this society are holding on to that book. Tough shit. So, moving on. Caitlin Johnstone. Gotta love this girl. Gotta love this woman, man. I really like. I'd love to just give her a good old high five. Here's her one of her newest articles. Punch the empire in the fucking face. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. Speech is violence, and cluster bombs are peace. Homelessness and war are normal, and opposing nuclear Armageddon is treason. You're a serious person if you believe our brains are being scrambled by Russian ray guns and kooky conspiracy theorists if you're skeptical about UFOs. U.S. officials talking about UFOs and aliens should make people more skeptical about UFOs and aliens, not less, especially in the early stages of a new Cold War and a race to militarize space. If they have been lying about UFOs this whole time, there's no basis for the belief that they've suddenly ceased having a good enough reason to keep lying. I am 100% wide open to the possibility of extraterrestrials and otherworldly vehicles zipping around our skies. What I am not open to is the claim that the most depraved institutions on Earth have suddenly opened their mind to telling us the truth about these things, either out of the goodness of their hearts or because they were pressured by UFO disclosure activists. That Israel is an ethno-nationalist apartheid state is so self-evident, it shouldn't even need to be said, let alone be controversial. An objective look at its government, laws, and tier system makes that clear, which is why mainstream human rights organizations call it an apartheid state. There's really no argument to the contrary. You can't reasonably argue that Israel isn't an apartheid state which oppresses people based on race. If you want to defend Israel on this front, all you can do is try to argue that sometimes apartheid and racism are good, and that Israel's apartheid and racism are the good kind. People say I'm always ranting against U.S. warmongering towards China because I'm socialist. I don't oppose U.S. warmongering against China because I'm a socialist. I oppose U.S. warmongering against China because I'm not a fucking moron. I'd oppose U.S. warmongering against China if China was the most capitalist country on earth. It's important to despise liberal political and media institutions and the capitalist, imperialist, authoritarian ideology they promote. It's also important that hatred not become your only guidance for understanding the world, because it'll turn you into a dopey Republican. I've watched so many people transform from bright-eyed supporters of Sanders, Corbyn, etc. into brain-dead wingnuts because their hatred of what passes for the left in the mainstream West led them to start taking up the opposite position from that faction on all issues. Don't do this. One of the biggest lies in Western politics is the political moderate, or centrist, because those who get labeled as such are reliably in favor of extreme imperialist violence and global tyranny. They're the exact opposite of moderates. They're violent extremists. The only reason such worldviews are mainstream is because vast fortunes are poured into making them mainstream via propaganda. And the only reason they're viewed as moderate is because we live under a violent extremist empire. In theory, both mainstream political parties compete to make your life better than the other does, so you'll vote for them. In practice, both parties openly oppress and impoverish you while focusing on murdering foreigners and competing for your vote based on your feelings about artificial wedge issues. They've rigged the political currency they'd normally use to obtain votes in a way that guarantees the continuation of the status quo in every meaningful way. So the gears of the empire keep turning uninterrupted, while the riffraff argue about hot-button wedge issues which don't affect power, like wokeness. It's important to keep a clear vision of how much better it could be, though. Imagine if they were competing with each other to improve your quality of life and give you a nicer country to live in, so that they could take credit, so you'll support them. That's how it should be. To be clear, when I talk about how both mainstream political parties are used to advance the same agendas, I am not saying they are the same. I like to compare them to the jab and the cross in boxing. They're two different punches, thrown from different hands, and they're used in completely different ways. But they're both being used by the same boxer, and they're both being used to knock you on your ass. The cross, which happens to come from the right hand for an orthodox fighter, is a damaging knockout punch. But in boxing, it's generally worthless on its own. It might be useful in a pub brawl, but against a skilled boxer, you need to set it up with the jab. The jab, the left hand for an orthodox fighter, is a swift, stunning blow. You don't see many knockouts with it, but you see it land with the great frequency because it's thrown by the hand that's closest to the other fighter. And the beauty of the jab is that it can be used to set up the cross, the famed 1-2, the most common combination in boxing. That's how the two mainstream parties work together, to knock the public on their ass. The left party sets them up, and then comes the crushing knockout blow. Democrats fight off all efforts to move the U.S. to the left when they're in power. Then Republicans come in and move it even further to the right. Democrats refused to codify Roe v. Wade, and Republicans come in to kill it. Democrats reluctantly give Bush war powers. He uses it to invade Iraq. Democrats inch up the brinksmanship against China. Republicans do whatever horrifying thing they're going to do when they take power. I'm simplifying things here for the sake of argument. Obama was a horrific warmonger, and etc. But the left hand can do damage in boxing too. Ukraine was more comparable to a 1-2 from a southpaw fighter. Trump set it up with Cold War escalations and by arming Ukraine, and Biden followed with a left cross. Over and over and over again, you see this happening. And over and over and over again, you're told that the solution to this problem is for everyone to simply never vote for Republicans. This despite the fact that the population is continually herded into an exact 50-50 political split by domestic propaganda, guaranteeing a continual pendulum between the two factions as opinions shift slightly based on who's in office. Saying that all you have to do is never have anyone vote for Republican is like telling a boxer to go into a fight and only worry about the right hand. If you go in against a skilled boxer with an educated jab and only focus on avoiding the cross, you're 100% guaranteed to get smashed to pieces by both the jab and the cross. No boxer would ever do this. Instead, they focus on their opponent as a whole. That's how you have to be about the two parties. Stop thinking about them as two separate competing entities and start looking at them as two weapons on the same enemy. Stop staring at one hand and start watching your actual opponent. Start watching their movements. Start making some reads. Start figuring out ways to put some leather in that fucker's face. Love it. It's just fun to read. It's just fun to read her stuff, man, honestly. Midnight Rose writes, you'd have an easier time arguing that those in power who adhere to the book aren't actually following the book, and those that do should abandon them and the heinous shit they do. Yeah. Zed, good to see you, bud. When are you going to be on Midwestern Marks? I have reached out to Midwestern Marks at one point, but the trouble is I'm small. Right? I'm small, and he's gotten larger, right? Like, he doesn't really need me, is the thing. Like, he wants to get onto shows like Vosh is what he wants. And he and his crew are working on how to pick apart, like, they're picking fights is what they're doing. Like, Eddie is a fighter. Like, he is a wrestler. And his crew, I think, thinks about it this way, that they have gotten to a point now where they're trying to pick fights. And they're trying to find bigger monsters and bigger beasts to fight. That's why they're continuously doing, like, they'll take a look at some of the CIA propaganda cartoon videos, like history in 5 minutes, that kind of stuff, and they'll tear that apart. And they're constantly going after people, and they're constantly doing that kind of stuff because they're trying to find bigger and bigger fights to take so that they can get Eddie into a position where he's actually talking to one of these guys, like Vosh, right? So that he can smash this guy, so that he can show so that he can show other people that there is a different way to look at the world and a different way to think about it. And that's, I think, what they're focused on. They don't have a reason to talk to me. Like, really. Like, I have a reason to want to be on their show, certainly. I have a reason to want to get connected with them, certainly. And my reason is as clear as day. It would expand my argument, or my audience, rather, right? It would make my audience bigger, I believe. But that's not really to Eddie's benefit, and I don't think he gets anything out of it, right? Like, really straightforward, right? Really straightforward. I love what Midwestern Marks do. I wish more power. If I could do something to help him, I would, but I just don't know what that might be. Honestly, I think the only help that he would accept from someone in my position would just be money. Right? Just support him monetarily, and that would be it. Or to direct people to him, right? But the truth, like, and let's be real, like, my audience is fairly small. I have a fairly small audience, especially compared to him. So I'm still building my power. That getting on a show like Midwestern Marks is a long-term goal. And who knows where it's going to go. Who knows where this goes? I have no idea. I just know that it's important that I do it. And I'm going to keep doing it. And so tell your friends. Tell your friends. Spread the message. Spread the good word. Join the cult. Verb the noun. Taste the rainbow. Only you can prevent forest fires. Silly rabbit tricks are for kids. Just do it. Tinker asking a good question. I like this question. I've actually been talking a bit about this on Reddit and stuff, so I'm happy that I now have the opportunity to actually talk about it here. Thoughts on Kissinger going to China, being welcomed? Real interesting. One of these controversial moments that gives a lot of the Western communists. Here, let's bring it up. China, Kissinger. China's Xi Jinping meets old friend Henry Kissinger. Continue, CBS. Get the fuck out of here. Are you kidding with me? Get out of here. Bye, CBS. Here you go. New York Times. Continue. Go away. Frustrated by Biden, China courts old friends like Kissinger. So, I think there's a few, like, the Western quote-unquote communists' perspective is, this is proof that China is not communist at all, and Mao would be rolling in his grave, and they're allying themselves with reprehensible people like Kissinger, just absolutely grotesque that they would even get into the same room. And I think that position is more or less indicative of what we have become, what we commonly understand here in Western communism as the purity cult, right? That we can all agree that Kissinger's a piece of shit, right? Like, anybody here going to stand up and be like, actually, I think that Henry Kissinger was as pure as the white snow, as a dove of a man, right? No. Like, Henry Kissinger is going to burn in hell, and we're all going to be like, yep, burn in hell, Henry Kissinger. But we are entering a realm that is called politics, right? That we live in a world called politics. And in politics, you've got to do business with people that you might think are reprehensible for the benefit of your own people, right? And so who is Kissinger to China? Well, Henry Kissinger was instrumental in the Nixon administration to opening up trade relations between the United States and China, something that China has 100% benefited from. China has 100% benefited to the opening up of trade relations. pays to remember that the Nixon administration was literally bombing outside their borders, right? Like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Korea, like Cambodia, like all of this shit was happening during the Nixon administration. And so for Nixon to actually say to China, hey, let's not do war with one another. You know, we've been bombing outside your borders for a while now. We could not do that with you, and instead we could trade instead. Well, trade is peace. And it was Nixon and Kissinger who were responsible for that. And so from the Chinese perspective, they're like, cool. Here's a guy that helped negotiate what is ostensibly a peace arrangement that has certainly, without a doubt, and you can't make the argument otherwise, led to the prosperity of China. That China has experienced prosperity because of this, right? And so the perspective of China is that, cool, right? Fantastic. Here's the point that gets missed more often than not, in my perspective. Kissinger and Nixon are the ones who are the first administration in America to acknowledge that Taiwan is China. They're the first to stand up post-World War II and say that there's no independence here. Taiwan is not its own country. We are not going to acknowledge that. We are going to go along with what China's policy is, which is one country, two systems. We're going to acknowledge the one China policy, and we're going to say Taiwan is China. Clutch moment. Key moment in Chinese-American relations. And why is this important today? Because now the administration in America is trying to say that Taiwan is its own independent country. Free Taiwan! Taiwan is an independent nation with its own independent people, and it should be able to make independent choices for... And so, China is touting out old Kissinger, this old bag of bones, to kind of remind not just America, because not everything is about America and convincing America to do stuff, but to remind the entire rest of the world, hey, all of this narrative coming out of the United States right now about how Taiwan is its own independent nation and it's okay to foment war on our border basically over this. Well, here's this guy. Remember this guy? Hey, you know what this guy said? You know what this guy did during the Nixon administration? You know, in the 60s? He said that Taiwan was part of China. So, like, it's actually like... So if the United States kicks off this war in Taiwan, right? The way that they kicked off a war in Ukraine again to get Russia involved. If they do that in Taiwan, the Chinese literally can hold this moment up and be like, bro, like you guys have been saying for decades that Taiwan is part of China. We consider this an invasion of Chinese soil. We consider you to be the aggressors. And they're going to hold this up, and a lot of the rest of the world is going to go, yeah, that's right. Like, that's right. Yep, that's the case. And so for me, I think this is what this meeting is actually all about. Is that I think saying that the Chinese are frustrated by Biden would be accurate. That they are frustrated that the Biden administration is playing this game, is playing this ridiculous, absurd game of saying that Taiwan is independent and it's okay for us to send weapons to Taiwan and it's okay for us to send world leaders to Taiwan. It's okay for us to talk this big game about this. And I think it's completely reasonable. And in fact, it's actually good play for the Chinese to, it's good play for the Chinese to bring someone like Kissinger out and say, hey, your whole point gets completely undercut by this guy. Like, here he is, part of the Nixon administration. Midnight Rose, Kissinger smoothed over relations with China and the West and helped them integrate into the world economy. Yep, that's definitely part of it. Snake, good to see you, bud. Honestly, I think if you brought up a valid topic like Marxism in Canada or something historical, they'd do a video. The Institute is there to teach their mission statement. Interesting. I could talk about Tim Buck. That would be a video. Like Tim Buck was the leader of the Communist Party in Canada and was arrested by the Canadian government. And like, so this idea that we're like in this free society, right? Like total fucking joke. So that's an interesting idea, Snake, actually. And that's a good point. I could actually do a video about communism in Canada and like the history of communism in Canada. And that might be something that would interest them. Yeah, and that's not a bad way of thinking about it, Snake. Like, what could I do in order to attract their attention? Because, like, what I'm doing right now is, like, this is basically shock jock stuff, which I love. I'm gonna be real straight with you guys. I love doing this. I really do. I love being, like, a radio jockey. Like, I love being, like, the Rush Limbaugh of communism. That's what I would love to become, is the Rush Limbaugh of communism. Make me Rush Limbaugh of communism. That's the goal. That's what we're doing here. Right? I love doing it. But that's never going to get me, like, the attraction of someone like Midwestern Marx. But your idea is a better one, actually, to do a video or to talk about the communism in Canada, the history of communism in Canada. Yeah, it's a thought, an interesting one. Rose says China also has been doing business recently with Saudi Arabia, and I'm pretty sure we can all agree Saudi Arabia is also awful, but it benefits their country and their people. So, yeah, I mean, the China has a non-interventionalist policy. It's their position is that the politics that exists within your borders is your business. And we are not going to intervene. So it really is like truly non-interventionalist politics. And their interest is in getting something for the benefit of their own people. And doing business with Saudi Arabia, like I suspect, and this is just me being suspicious and I don't have the document or anything. Like I don't have the Saudi prince admitting to this. But I think that the genocide that's going on in Yemen is by and large happening by the Saudis so that the Chinese have to do business with the Saudis. I think that's probably what it's all about. That if it wasn't for the catastrophe and the inability of the Yemenis to be able to organize themselves because of this ongoing war and because of the catastrophe of it all, I think that the Chinese would be amenable to doing business with the Yemens. But the Saudis are ensuring that can't happen. And so the Chinese are put into the position of, okay, we either do business with the Saudis or we don't get anything done. Tough choice. Politics is a dirty business. Tinker says, so Kissinger is not only responsible for war crimes, but he's a bit responsible for offshoring jobs to China? Absolutely. Yeah, without Kissinger, you don't get NAFTA. That Kissinger's not really responsible for NAFTA, but he definitely sets that up so that NAFTA can happen. And NAFTA is the ultimate betrayal. That's the moment that America decided to deindustrialize itself, right? Because without NAFTA, you don't get all of that offshoring. All of that offshoring doesn't happen. And or at least it would be much more difficult to actually accomplish and achieve. But with NAFTA, it just opened everything up and just made it like way easier for international corporations to exist and to do what they did, which is essentially deindustrialize America. Isaac says the U.S. has no support for the Ukraine war by the rest of the world, and it'll be the same with Taiwan. Yeah, I mean, I think what the Chinese are trying to do, and I think they're doing a pretty decent job of it, is they're trying to make it way more clear-cut. That I think it came to be the case that the U.S. didn't get support for the Ukrainian war. I think that came to be the case. But in the early days of the war, when and for the most of the world, the war begins with Russia's invasion, right? For most of the world, the Russian invasion is the moment that the war begins, and I think that the Chinese are trying to create a narrative and trying to get ahead of this so that they can get people on their side faster, so that they're not in a position, because I do think the Russians got themselves into a position where they were focused on winning the battle on the ground and organizing the battle on the ground, but they didn't really have a good strategy, or any strategy really, about how to win the narrative battle. And I think that's really pretty clear, and really true. They don't really have, like, there aren't really many good sources for the lead up. There's nothing that, like, why didn't the Russian government itself create something to make clear its own history, right? To make clear what was going on. Like, the coup mattered, right? But you really got to dig around to find out about this coup, right? And I think China is trying to make that less the case. I think they're doing a better job of it. That the Chinese are actually sitting there being like controlling the narrative, or at least creating a powerful counter narrative, does matter. And I think that something like this meeting with Kissinger, helps create that powerful counter narrative that the Russians didn't have. And I think the Chinese are trying to get ahead of it, because I think they see it coming. They see it coming. And the Americans have lost their minds. Like, the Americans are just doing things because they don't know what else to do. And I think it's been this case and been this way since Bush. That before Bush, I think the Americans were at least attempting to justify their actions based on, like, a cost-benefit analysis. Like, you could take a look at Bush Sr., and he's like, no, we're not going to go into Iraq because that would be a quagmire, right? And they are trying to justify their actions on kind of like a cost-benefit analysis of, like, what do we actually get out of this? Whereas I think that not that much later, under the Bush Jr., W., I just think that they're doing things because they don't know what else to do. And I more or less look at most of the actions that the United States has been doing in that kind of light now. That they're just getting involved in conflicts because they don't know what else to do, and there are institutions that want it to happen. Like, the CIA wants to grow heroin in Afghanistan, and then wants to transport that heroin into poor black neighborhoods and poor downtrodden neighborhoods to get everybody hooked on drugs so they can't organize, right? Like, that's what they want. The Raytheon wants the war so it can sell bombs and shit, right? So there are all these different institutions that are interested, and there's no one really standing there being like, is this actually good for the life of America? Is this actually good for the history or the future of our nation? Right? Everybody's just kind of looking out for themselves because of this ideology of individualism, right? That's all predicated on more money for me. And so what are they doing? They're just acting like a bunch of dumb idiots, right? That's the trifecta. Just a bunch of people who are selfish, greedy morons who are just carving up as much money as they can for themselves. And they're like, well, there's another place to make a lot of money. There's another place to make a lot of money. Like, I personally can make a lot of money. It's going to impoverish the United States. It's going to spread misery throughout the United States as we pilfer the treasury in order to pay for all of this. But I don't care. I'm going to make a lot of money. And I think that's what happens more or less in Ukraine, and I think that's more or less what's going to happen in Taiwan. That against all advice and sense and reason, they'll do it because it's going to make them a lot of money, right? And that'll be the end of it. And China will win, right? I've literally seen articles where, like, high-level, like, Pentagon officials are like, if we start this war, we're going to run out of bullets in a week. This is going to cripple the military. Like, this is going to be a real problem for us if we do this. I think they're going to do it anyway. Because I just think that they're interested in money and power and wealth and prestige for themselves. They don't care about the overall health of the project. They don't care about the overall health of even the military. Because because they're vultures. right? Like, vultures don't care about the life of the thing they're eating, right? They just understand more food for me is good. And so it's exactly as Marx predicted, that capitalism eventually eats itself. And so these guys are going to go to war with Taiwan. They're going to go to war with China, not because they think they can win, not because they think it's going to be good for the life of America, not because they think it's going to be good for the life of the military even, not because they think it's going to actually benefit anyone in any regard, even though that's the propaganda and the nationalist rhetoric that they'll use. They're going to do it because it's going to make me, the CEO of Raytheon, or me, the leader of the CIA, or me, the president of the United States, a lot of money. And then I will be able to take that money and buy a ranch in Nebraska, or buy an island where I can keep my my pedophile children, or some little place out in the middle of nowhere, and escape all of this stuff and not pay any consequences for my actions whatsoever. Like, that's what they're doing, right? And so I am more or less of the opinion, and I think the Chinese are also more or less of the opinion, that a war with Taiwan and a war for Taiwan is inevitable, unavoidable, written in the stars, because the people who are going to antagonize it, the people who are actually going to go to war, don't care if they win or not. That's not what it's about. It's just another place to make a lot of money. It's just another place to spend a lot of money. And that's all it is. And so the Chinese, I think, are making decisions. Certainly they would like to see this not happen, right? Certainly they would like to see this not happen. Absolutely. But I think that they're not fooling themselves. I think that they see that it's going to happen. And so their goal is to try to make it as less of a bloodletting as it possibly can be. I think that's their goal, is to just make it so that it's not as bloody as possible, and to try to find as many allies and try to find as much support as they can before it happens. What is your view of the 9-dot line of Chinese territorial claim? I honestly don't know what that is, bud. 9-dot line, China territorial claim. The 9-dash line. Wikipedia is not for sale. Oh, China's territorial claim, various times the 11th dash is a set of line segments. Territorial Republic, South China Sea, contested, yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Territorial disputes are common. Like that's something I think it's really important to know and understand, is that territorial disputes are extremely common all of the time. I think that my opinion is that I don't really have an opinion. Like, China is like, these set of islands over here belong to China. Vietnam is probably also like, nah bro, these islands belong to Vietnam. Philippines is probably like, we have a claim on that to a certain degree. And then the islands themselves are probably like, can't we just be our own thing? Like, why do we gotta belong to you? Right? And that conversation is a conversation that is old as time itself. Who owns what? Who has claim over what? Should China even have claim over this? Should Vietnam even have claim over these things, right? And the hard truth is that that's something that these places are going to have to work out for themselves. That's the hard truth. That my opinion on it, and the opinion of America, and the opinion of the West is basically irrelevant. That this is very clearly a dispute that is going to be between those powers. And I guess the only opinion I would ever have is, if America has involved itself, America should get the fuck out of there. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, America? You certainly don't have a claim over those islands. Like, you certainly don't have a claim over those islands, right? Like, get the F out of there, America. Bye-bye. and leave it for Vietnam and China and the islands themselves to figure it out. Because I don't know the history. I don't know anything about these islands. I don't know anything about any of it. I don't know why they have claims. I don't know why they've come up with any of these ideas or any of these thoughts. And so for me to try to lay judgment on it, it's just not, I'm just not positioned for that. I just don't have the position to be able to do that. And I think I would have to know like a lot more before I was even able to begin offering that kind of position, right? Like that, and that's all I think. Yeah, I thought Reagan was the beginning of all this. It looks like Kissinger-Nixon was the spark, eventually led Clinton down to NAFTA. Yeah, I mean, everything's built on something, right? How does NAFTA offshore when it's a trade agreement between Mexico, U.S., and Canada? Because it allows for the offshoring of manufacturing. That's what it allows for. Like, it was an agreement between all of those nations that they would begin offshoring, and they did. Why are all the communist YouTubers working separate? Can you imagine everyone interviewing each other? What great content. Yeah, I kind of feel the same, actually, Zed. Like I don't know. I should start reaching out, but like, I do think that there is a tier. There are tiers that have come up, right? Like people like Second Thought and that group of guys, Hakeem and Second Thought and Hugo Punk, right? Like they've created like a little group, and so they've kind of taken your advice, which is why are we working separately? We should band together, and so they have, right? But right now, the way I look at it is that there are people who have, there are commentators who have attained a certain level of prominence, and there's good reason for it, right? They worked hard, they created good content, right? All that kind of stuff. And now that they've attained that level of the level that they have, right? They're not going to look back. They're not, right? They aren't going to turn around and try to pick somebody up. So maybe what I should be doing is I should be looking for smaller communities myself. I don't know who, obviously, but I should be looking for like a small person who has a small, 1,000 subscriber, 100 subscribers even, and I should be inviting them, and that's what I should be doing. Because that's clearly a hole, isn't it? Right? Where is the communist interviewing other communists? Where is the communist who is platforming other communists and getting other communists around and having conversations with other communists and sort of mixing that all together? Right? I don't know who that is. So that could be me. Right? Maybe that should be me. So here's a good opportunity. If you guys know any small communities, right? Like, let's stop thinking about this as let's get John on a bigger platform. Because I don't think that's going to happen. Because those bigger platforms, that's not what they're doing. Right? Like guys like Second Thought and Hakeem and all those guys, they're creating like informational videos. Right? Same thing with Midwestern Marks. They're creating like informational videos. Right? Well, that's not what I'm doing. Right? That's not what I'm doing. Right? This is shock jock shit. Right? This is Rush Limbaugh. Right? And that's more or less the goal that I've always had. I remember years before I started doing YouTube, I said to myself, I want to be the Rush Limbaugh of the left. That's what I said. I remember saying it. And now here I am and I'm doing it. And so what I should be doing is interviewing them. But they don't have any reason to come on my show because they're too big. But there are smaller people out there, I'm sure, that I could be finding. And I should be bringing those people on. And we should be having conversations with those people. Because that's how you actually build force. Right? Anyway, that's just me thinking out loud. Snake says, that's absolutely your role in the movement. But both can exist, i.e. a teaching Limbaugh, as you have a perspective as others will appreciate. A historical analysis or reading books. Yeah. Just an idea to grow. Yeah, believe me, bud. I could use as many ideas as I can get. Michael, good to see you, bud. Tinker says, the Russians are bad at propaganda aimed at the West. RT and RT English was only launched in 2010. Putin and his oligarch capitalists were too busy slicing up the pie with friends and family. Yeah. They're pushing Poland to go into West Ukraine and fight Belarus on their border. Ugh. What a bad idea. But again, it's all bad ideas, right? It's just about making money. Like, Poland should not do that. It just should not do that. If Ukraine gets sliced up, it should be diplomatically. Like at this point, like Kiev just needs to try to get a ceasefire in all of this, man. Like that's really what it comes down to. What's crazy is that this could be the issue that gets Trump elected. Trump's position is to end the war, right? Like that's his position. He wants the war to end, and he's got a great comment. When people say, does this mean you're pro-Russia? He just says, I just want the killing to stop, which I think really resonates. I think that really, really resonates with people. That you get accused of being pro-Russia and you just say, I just want the killing to stop. I think that for like Midwestern Republicans, for even Deep South Republicans, that's goddamn right. Let's bring these boys home, right? Jahone says, it's crazy how much USA tries to portray China as warmongers when we're positioning so hard to entice war with China, and we've had far more military involvement everywhere. Clown behavior. Absolutely, bud. I wish more Americans would compare us fighting over Taiwan to how Russia is fighting to protect the sovereign area of Donbass. At the very least, liberals should admit Russia is using our playbook. I mean, I will always say, right? I'm not a Putin stan. You guys know, right? Like, I think Putin is a fascinating figure, a fascinating leader for this time. But I do think he is something of an opportunist, and that for all the isms that a person can be accused or can be pegged with, I think opportunism is the word to use for Putin. But but I think that he really didn't have a choice. Like, really, I just think that when it comes down to it, when you actually know about the coup, when you actually know about what was going on in Donbass, when you actually know what was going on in Putin's own parliament, when you actually know what the people themselves were saying to Putin, I just think he didn't have a choice. It was literally this or be removed and have somebody come in who would do it. That I think the trajectory, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and ostensibly America was completely of America's making. That if it was like a playground, if you were on a playground, right, and there was this big giant bully who was beating the shit out of your sister, right, and like staring at you, beating the shit out of your sister on the playground, and you came over and popped the bully in the mouth, right, everybody would look at that and understand what happened there. Like, nobody would be like, that guy popped that guy in the mouth for no reason, right? Like, maybe you could create the argument that like violence isn't the answer and there are other things that you could have done and like all that kind of stuff. Sure, maybe, but no one's going to stand there and say it's outside the realm of understanding, right? Like, and forget about sister, cousin. Cousin is a better analogy. Like, if there's a big giant bully wearing like a Nazi flag, no less, beating the shit out of your cousin on a playground, you're probably going to intervene, right? You're probably going to do something, and it's understandable that you would, right? And that's more or less the analogy that I see, right? That like, look, if you're in the playground and someone's beating the shit out of your cousin, you're going to go over there. And that's the thing that bothers me about what liberals do, is that they refuse to acknowledge the events leading up to Russia's intervention. They refuse to acknowledge the coup. They refuse to acknowledge the Azov battalion. I've seen lots and lots and lots of people do what I consider to be amount to Nazi sympathizing, right? Or at least like downplaying the Nazi presence when it's very obvious that the Azov battalion was instrumental in all of this, like extremely obvious. And literally, like, the Azov battalion is like doing marches complete with like full on Nazi salutes and stuff. Like, you gotta be intentional in your avoiding of it. You gotta be avoiding it on purpose. And I think that's more or less what liberals do. is that they refuse to acknowledge the reality of the lead up to that conflict. That like the Americans couped the government. They literally funded neo-Nazis. I literally have Ottawa Citizen articles saying that my government, the Canadian government, was funding neo-Nazis in the Azov battalion. We've got eyewitnesses like Russell Bentley, right? Who was in the Donbass region since 2015. Like we've got the State Department confessing to the coup. Like, we've got so much evidence, we've got so much on the table, and liberals just... Russian propaganda! Russian propaganda! You're just a Putin stan! You're just a Putin stan! No, bud. Like, these are facts. Like, this is what happened. This is like a real thing that occurred. And you just don't want to engage in reality because it shows you what your country is actually willing to do. Like, why is it any different than what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan or Somalia or Syria, right? Or Libya or Latin America? Like, why is this story? Why is Ukraine any different than all of those stories? And the truth, and liberals certainly, and even conservatives don't like it when I say this, but it's absolutely the truth. The reason why Ukraine is different is because Ukraine is white. That's the difference. That when we're going into Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or Lebanon or Jordan or Libya, Egypt, Chad, Sudan, Zimbabwe, right, Somalia, Ethiopia, Chile, Brazil, Venezuela, right? When we're going into all these places, Argentina, like when we're going into all these places, well, what do you know? America's America. We get to America wherever we want to America. Why is it different? What's the difference between Ukraine and all of those other places? Jahone says, I'd love to see content with you and smaller creators. Interview content as a podcast or something would be great. Yeah, you know, it's a good idea. I also think, like, I think to myself, boy, as I've been coming up, it'd be really nice, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be nice if there was, like, when I only had 100 subscribers or 150 subscribers or 200 subscribers, even 500 or 1,000, wouldn't it have been nice if there had been somebody who had, like, you know, a slightly larger platform that was like, hey, come on my show. Let's just mix and mingle. Like, let's do an interview. Right? Wouldn't that be nice? It would be nice. I should try to do that. If you guys know any small creator out there, please let me know. And I have tried to do this before, but it's organization, and I'm pretty bad at that. Mikhail, been watching. Good to see you, bud. I recently got a camera and a microphone, but I don't have a channel or anything. I just dropped out of radio broadcasting a while ago. Just saying. Mikhail wants to compete. You gonna put on a podcast, Mikhail? Or do you want to come on the show, bud? We could do like a twofer. Have like a foil. Poland is very Russophobic and racist. Washington knows this and is going to use them, of course. Yeah, I mean, what Poland is Russophobic? No kidding. What a shocker to hear that. Pacifists in those situations deserve to get decked too. Trump wants the killing to be in his own country or against Iran for Israel. Trump is aiming for China. He sees Russia as white. I actually think that if look, I don't disagree with anything you just said there, but I do think that Trump, I think, his opinion of Russia is that he wants to do business with Russia, right? That's more or less how I think he views it. That when the question of whether or not Russia was going to integrate with the West was on the table, right, during the Yeltsin-Gorbachev years, and then the early Putin years, when the question as to whether or not Putin is going to integrate, or Russia is going to integrate with the West or not, is actually on the table. I think that Trump's position was, yeah, it should. That it should. We got to do business with these guys, right? These guys are good for business. We can do business, right? That's what it's all about, I think, for him. And he was doing business with Russia, right? Which the Democrats took as a negative, that they managed to flip that and really whip up some Russophobia and be like, Russia Gate, and they stole the election from Hillary, and and that's really the hill that they've chosen to die on about this whole Russia thing. And when in reality, I think they were all doing business with Russia. It's just that Trump was like doing business with Russia, you know? And so I think that's more or less the reason why he never wanted NATO to get involved in any of this, because I think he just wanted to do business. And I think that's kind of respectable. Yeah, deep down, liberals still want to believe their country is the Avengers. Deep down, but I don't think it's deep down. I don't think it's deep down at all. I think it's right on the surface. Like, the Biden administration literally ran commercials casting Biden as an Avenger-style superhero. I think that it's well understood within the halls of power, and I think it's well understood even by the electorate itself, that they believe that their country is the Avengers or Superman or these superheroes. And it's always kind of been that way, right? Like, Superman has always been traditionally an icon of American truth, justice, and the American way, right? It's why they can't make a good Superman movie anymore, because everybody knows it's full of shit. If you actually took, like, even the Christopher Reeves Superman and you tried to make that Superman movie and put it in front of people would be like, who the fuck is this loser? Who's this dweeb? This fucking dumbass guy. He's got all these superpowers. He can't kiss a girl. He's too nervous around Lois Lane, but he can turn the planet backwards to reverse time. Like, what a dork. What a loser this guy is. Right? I think that would be more or less the mindset of the American people, right? That if you were actually going to make a movie about Superman and have him reflect what American values currently are, you would be making a movie about Homelander. That's who that movie would be about. Mikhail says, well, I never wanted to be the speaker on the mic when I went to college. I just wanted to be the music producer. But I do recognize the need to adapt. I've been wanting to contribute more lately. Oh, dude. I know all about that, man. Like, even now, I feel like I'm not doing enough, you know? But the reality is I only have so much energy, and I only have so much, like, I need time off for myself too, you know? And it's, well, there are good ways to contribute, Mikhail. Number one, you could tell your friends about me. Number two, you could give me some money. Number three, you could let me know if there's anybody I should bring on the show. Eric wants to go back to the 9- line. You should Google. Nah, it's okay, bud. I just don't know enough about it. And honestly, I don't give a shit about the Barbie movie. I just don't. Like, it's a kid's movie. I feel like I've said what I need to say about Barbie. Superman was written originally in the 30s as a socialist icon who beat up landlords and rescued housewives from their husbands. It changed in the 60s after the comic code destroyed adult stories. I'll correct myself, the 40s changed him. That's hilarious, dude. Is that real? He, like, beat up landlords, rescued housewives? That's hilarious. There's a Superman I'd pay attention to. Right? There's a Superman I'd be like, yeah, here we go. An invincible dude walking around beating the shit out of landlords. Amazing. Tinker says, new study suggests Gulf Stream collapse, maybe as early as 2025. Some scientists disagree, but I think this provides evidence it's really too late. Yeah, I mean, I think that the most credible thing, the most credible position to take is not to focus on a big collapse moment. I think one of the big troubles with the climate change discourse And we can only say this in retrospect, so it's not really blaming anybody for anything, but it's just kind of is what happened, is that there was always this sort of red alarm, there's going to be a big collapse, and all of the media about it was all about this like big event, that everything is focused around the event, and there's been this expectation of an event that's going to occur, something like a Gulf Stream collapse, right? Something like that, which is completely possible. I'm not downplaying this, nor am I saying it couldn't happen, right? And that it's completely credible. There are definitely scientific studies, and there's definitely people saying that it could happen, maybe even as early as 2025, for sure, right? Never going to downplay that. But I think that we do ourselves a disservice by focusing on the event, because the event doesn't happen, right? And when the event doesn't happen, it makes people lose faith in it. And it makes people question it. I mean, well, you've been calling for this collapse for years, and so where is this thing? And all this. We should be focusing instead on the observable changes that are already happening. And we should be focusing instead on the persistent, consistent changes that have been happening. And we should be focusing on the idea that you see how it's gotten a little bit worse, right? So it's going to continue getting a little bit worse. That year by year by year by year, it's just going to get a little bit worse until finally, instead of being here, we're going to be here, right? That instead of it being, boy, it's hot, it's going to be shit, I cannot go outside. And then shortly thereafter, it'll be, I can't live here, right? Like that's the trajectory. And that it's going to be more like a trajectory. That it's I worry that the narratives about big event are actually working against us. And instead we should focus on a trajectory that is observable, that you can show people. Because we're living it. Mikhail says, I need to work on making friends. Boy, tell me about it, dude. I feel like everybody needs to work on that one, but there's no place to do it anymore, and we're all exhausted. I spent years off social media, so I don't really have much of a presence for sharing. What's my Patreon? It's in the description, my man. And if you donate even $1, it gets you into the Patreon. I actually feel really blessed about the platform that I have. I got to tell you. Like, I've said it before, but it's worth saying, and and saying it out loud so that I can hear it for myself, I think is good for my own mental health, which is, I have definitely talked to streamers who tell this story of how they wanted to stream, and they would turn the stream on, and they would do their show to nobody, and maybe at one point someone would pop in, but then they would pop out. And then at the end of the show, they would close the show up to nobody. And I've talked to a lot of streamers, and most of them have that kind of story. And I have never had that happen. Never once. And I think it has something to do with how I built my audience in the first place. That I started with smaller videos because I didn't have the time to do this, certainly. I didn't have the time to do this. And I really was just making a video on my way home from work. I had a half-hour walk home from work. And so I just walked home from work, and I just talked about the events that were going on and the thoughts that I had in my head that I built up over the day. And that built a following over time, and I shared them around. And now and then once I was able to do live streams, because you need a certain amount of subscribers before you can start doing that, I really wanted to. Because the goal was always to be the Rush Limbaugh of the left. That's always been the goal for me. And I sort of think about like, oh, maybe I could do those smaller videos again, do that kind of stuff while also doing the live stream. And the truth is that I don't want to. That I want to do this. But maybe I should start viewing those smaller videos as promotional tools, right? Instead of thinking of them as the thing that I'm doing, I should be thinking of them as a way to promote this channel and what I'm doing. Yeah, that's not a bad thing to think about. I'll think about that more. And but I'm so grateful. I'm very, very grateful that every time I've hit record on this thing, there's someone on the other end. I'm very, very grateful for that. And every time I say goodnight, there's someone listening on the other end. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Because it makes me feel like I'm penetrating the gaslighting. That I'm shining a clear, true light out there for people to see through the fog of the gaslight. That our entire society and our entire situation is gaslighting. There are $100 billion organizations that are screaming propaganda out at us and are gaslighting us and are funding people who are willing to gaslight you. And this channel exists to cut through that gaslighting. And to make you realize that you are being gaslit. That they want to point the finger at you and say it's a you problem, and they want you to believe it. They want you to believe that you're the failure. They want you to believe that you're the person who is responsible for things like climate change. They want you to think this. Well, that's utter nonsense. That's utter nonsense. That we know that we live in systems, and we know those systems are betraying us. We know they are not working for our benefit. We know that. And we don't need to fall for this dumb gaslighting anymore. Because if you're by yourself, and I know this was true of me, and I assume it's true of many others, when you're by yourself, you're vulnerable. When you're by yourself, you're vulnerable. When you live alone or with even a roommate, a girlfriend or a wife, a husband or a boyfriend, you're isolated. It's easy to gaslight you. And it's easy even when you know you're being gaslit, even when you know it's a lie. It's easy to give up, and it's easy to shrug, and it's easy to say, oh, well, everyone else is doing this, I guess I will do it too. And I refuse to let us continue to be isolated. I refuse to let us go down being gaslit. I refuse to allow anyone out in the world who knows that we are living in a society of illusions and lies to continue moving forward in isolation. I refuse. And I'm so grateful that you're here to listen. And I'm so grateful that you care. Thank you, Jahone. I appreciate that, bud. Snake, I'm not doing a Barbie review. Dude, here's my Barbie review. This is a children's movie for children. If you're basing your ideology on this movie, you're a child, and it's time to grow up. Read a book. There's my review. Like, I completely think it's fine for anyone to talk about this movie any way they like. Because it's a children's movie for children. Like, every single time they do a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, right? I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I do. I will watch the shit out of it. I will critique it. I will tear it apart. I will tell you the things I like, and I'll tell you the things I hate. Absolutely. I am not basing my political worldview on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I am not trying to influence the world and influence the wider culture and influence our political sphere through the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles began to be used in such a way in the culture, I would consider that to be a major decline of our civilization. Why? Because the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is for kids. And it's for that part of your heart that's all about just adventure and brotherhood and martial arts fun. It's a story about 4 turtles that become human-esque and humanoid because they get hit with some mutant X ooze. Like, that's what the story's about. And so, like, I feel exactly the same way about Barbie. No one should care this much. There should be exactly no political commentaries talking about this. People like Ben Shapiro completely reveal his childishness by his quote-unquote critiques of this film. You know who should be talking about this film? Film critics. Those are the people who should be talking about this film, right? You know who should be talking about this film? Children, right? Little kids, mainly, right? That anybody who wants to kind of come up and be like, hey, there's a feminist thing going on in here. Oh, I should be against. Should be like the film critics. Like, there's one guy that I listen to. He is a film critic on YouTube, The Critical Drinker. And he is an anti-feminist all the way. But I listen to his stuff because he's the best articulation of that worldview that exists. And I'm like, there's the guy that should be saying this stuff. But if you're running a political podcast, if you're running a political show, you know, something that's intended for adults, and you're actually, like, forming a political position on the Barbie movie, I think you're embarrassing. I think it's an embarrassing thing to do. I do think that the sort of anti-feminist perspective, or the male perspective, the manosphere perspective, is short-sighted and reductive and extraordinarily unwise. That if it is about a man getting on with women, like if that's your goal in life, is to have a good relationship with women, then maybe you should use this as an opportunity to learn something about what it is little girls and their mothers are interested in watching. Like, maybe you should soften up a little bit. Maybe you could be a little bit more like Ken, right? You know? Maybe you shouldn't take it so personally. Maybe you should nut up. Maybe if you're going to be so offended by what really does amount to, like, female fantasy porn, more or less, which exists all over the culture, which is different than male fantasy porn, unsurprisingly. But if you're going to get, like, all, like, uppity about it, and you're going to get all, like, sniffy about it when you watch, like, female fantasy porn, if you're going to get all hurt about it, then you're just a fragile little boy. That's all. That's really all it is. Like, the fragility that's on display is unbelievable. That it's all these big, like, these guys walking around being like, big, tough men should be respected because we're big, tough men. They're the most fragile people I've ever seen in my life. Oh, no. They made a movie about a children's toy that's meant for little girls, right? And those little girls are going to go to the theater with their moms, because their moms also played with those toys when they were little girls. And they, unsurprisingly, told a story that might appeal to those little girls and those women. And it appears to have been completely successful. And instead of these fragile little boys saying, well, this is pretty clearly like fantasy porn. Like we as men definitely do the same thing. Like we as men definitely do the same thing. Right? And here's the female version of it. Well, what can we learn from it? What can we find out about it? How does this... Instead of saying that, they're just rejecting it offhand because it's not jerking them off. That's all. Like, that's all. Anyway. Oppenheimer, yeah. I agree with your review wholeheartedly. I can't say this movie is for young children. More for teenagers. No, it's for kids. Like, maybe they're grown up. Like, maybe they're 20. Right? Maybe they're 30 even. But it's for kids. Like... It's for kids, dude. Like, it's fine if you don't want, like, it's fine if you watch it. Like I love the Ninja Turtles. I will always watch the Ninja Turtles, but it's for kids. Like, and just because that kid has a mortgage or a car doesn't mean anything. It's for kids. Rose, the cultural dialectic of mutant Ninja Turtles in New York subway, allying with the giant rats to root out destructive human society. Well, the anti-SJW, anti-feminist manosphere stuff is also childish, yeah. So, of course, they flock to talking about the Barbie movie. It's true, dude. You're not wrong. Lou, you want to hear a song? Sure, I'll play a song. I was playing this one earlier, so I'll play this one for you. Oh, sorry, Milo. You gotta make room for the guitar. Sorry, bud. I know, you looked really cozy there. I'm sorry to do that to you, bud. These times they are uncertain, of that there is no doubt, and nobody can tell me quite what it's all about. The heartbreak and the loneliness, the chaos and the fear will make even the strongest cry. I wish my ma was here. A young man on a battlefield fights for a rich man's gold. The bullet cracks into his spine, he knows he won't grow old. And as the tears come streaming down, at once his mind goes clear. The war was fought for nothing, he cries, I wish my ma was here. A lively story well in hand, a joke to soothe your soul. And when it came to arguing, she'd forgive and let it go. And when I cried, she held me, told me it's okay, my dear. And as we face these darkened days, I wish my ma was here. And as we march into the streets, as all the righteous do, we'll raise our voices to the skies. They cannot stop the truth. And as we tear their structures down, we'll raise a victory cheer. We made the world a better place, and I wish my ma was here. Yeah, we made the world a better place, and I wish my ma was here. Ah. That one's becoming something of a fan favorite, actually. Oh. There you go, Lou. That one was for you, bud. I hope it's everything you were hoping for, Lou. Can I be real straight with Oppenheimer? I'm skeptical. And I'm skeptical for one single reason. I don't actually like Christopher Nolan. I actually don't think he's that good a storyteller. How's that for a bombshell? Huh? Huh? I know, I've stunned you all into silence with that one. Everyone's just sitting over there being like, oh my God. I thought that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy was objectively bad. Good performances from people like Heath Ledger, right? His Joker performance, everybody loved it. But the movies themselves are more or less bad. The storytelling is incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. The third installment is a bad movie. Just full stop. Like we don't need to go much deeper than that. Just like stupid choices, dumb ideas. The villain was completely sympathetic, and I was completely on his side until he just decided to nuke the city for no reason. Like, for no reason. Literally, Bane was winning, even ideologically, and then he's just like, and now we nuke the city! And you're like, why? Like, why? Why is this a thing? And it just is. So it's just incoherent garbage. So the Dark Knight trilogy was bad. Inception, which was his other sort of big one. Inception was visually very, very interesting. I think he also has this kind of trait, like Nolan has this kind of trait that other filmmakers have. A guy like Tim Burton is like this, where he's a really interesting visual storyteller. Like, Tim Burton is a really excellent cinematographer, but he's not that good a storyteller, right? And Nolan is sort of the same way. You're welcome, Lou. And and Inception, I actually think that Inception could have used a healthy dollop of David Lynch. That David Lynch would have said of that script, why are you explaining everything? Stop explaining everything. Let the audience be lost. Let them puzzle it out. It's not a hard story. He wants to incept a dream inside of this guy, so he goes inside the guy, and then he goes down a level, and then he incepts the dream. It's an easy story. Anyone can figure it out. Let them figure it out. That's what David Lynch would say. And so there's like entire characters that he would just remove. There are whole scenes that David Lynch would be like, why are they having this conversation? It's so stupid. No one would ever talk this way. It's an unimportant conversation. Everyone would understand what is happening. Let the audience be confused then. Like, because people would be like, are you worried about losing the audience? No. Let them be lost. Let them figure it out. It'll be better for them. Let them use their brains. Like, that's what Lynch would be saying. And to me, that's sort of like, this isn't to say that Inception was a bad movie. I actually thought that Inception was a pretty okay movie. But like all of the people who were walking around being like, I didn't get it, and I'm so confused, and oh, it was such a thing. I'm like, really? It's very obvious what was happening that whole time. They literally were explaining it to you. It wasn't even that mind-bendy. Like, it wasn't even this big, like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Literally, they go into his dream, which is like Nightmare on Elm Street, right? Like, we all saw Nightmare on Elm Street, right? So you go into the dream, and then you go down a couple of levels, and he has to convince himself, like the person who's dreaming has to be the one who believes that the idea is his own. And that's it. Like, that's it. And that's the whole film. And then right at the end, there's like the little spinning top, and then it wobbles a little, and we're all like, oh, is he in a dream? Oh my God, right? But like, to me, the entire impact of the film was sort of lost because there were people like walking around basically being like, and then we'll go into the dream, and then we'll go down a level into the dream, and the way to get out of the dream is to go out of it. And I'm like, just like, no, don't do that. What are you talking about? Get David Lynch in there and be like, get rid of this character. We don't need this character. Well, the audience won't know what's going on. That's the point. Let them figure it out. Like that's it. And then also his other one, Interstellar. I actually thought Interstellar was a straight up bad movie. Hey, Bread Cultist, how you doing, bud? Like, everybody sort of was like losing their mind about Interstellar. I genuinely think Interstellar was a bad movie. Like, it was okay, but the plot is incoherent. Even when you actually say it all out loud, it's just like, it doesn't actually make sense. Random. That would be the word that I would use to describe Interstellar. It's just a series of random events that occurred. And we're all supposed to just be like, whoa, those random events that occurred are so interesting. And I'm like, no, they're not. They were just random. Like, it was like a random scene generator. Like, almost every single scene in Interstellar, like, it was a series of short stories. And every single one of the short stories could have been lifted out of the movie and replaced with literally anything else, and it would have stayed the same. Right? That the only thing that needed to happen, spoiler alert, I guess, was that he somehow ends up communicating back the original message that starts the whole thing off. Right? But there's any number of ways to have done that, and the random event that he chose was actually, I thought it was the worst one. That he just happened to go through, so he goes through a black hole, and then just ends up in the place that he needs to end up in to do the thing that he needs to do. And I even felt like the visual representation of it was bad. Like, I just think that there's a million different ways they could have done that. And like, so Interstellar is one of these movies that I feel like gets so much hype and everybody's like all about it, but really it's kind of a miss in my view. Not that good a film. Visually interesting. And even some of the ideas like being on the planet and the time dilation and all that kind of stuff, like that's all interesting stuff, sure. But like the movie itself, I'm just like, I never found myself really rooting for the character. I didn't find the character to be that interesting. I didn't find the world that they were living in to be that fleshed out or interesting either. Everything just seems sort of random. It's just a random series of events that happened. And I was supposed to just be like touched by it, I guess. I don't know why. I don't know why I was supposed to be like, great. Here's a series of random events that occurred. Midnight Rose says, I don't really like the guy either, but I've heard from a lot of leftists that this one is one of his few good movies. Overall, it's very good. One of my friends recently saw it and also loved it. Yeah, I've been hearing interesting things about Oppenheimer, right? And as long as it stays historically accurate, to me, that's sacrosanct. Like, I'm at this point in my life now where if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, they made a biopic about this guy. They changed a lot of the elements and changed a lot of the story, but, you know, it's still a good movie. I'm like, I'm out. I don't care. So it's not a biopic. Like, it's just named that. Like, I don't give a shit. Yeah, Inception lost me in the first hour, not because it was confusing. I just thought it sucked. Like, there were good things in Inception. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, again, I think the visuals were interesting. It's always nice to see beautiful people in exotic locales, right? Like, that's always fine. The whole concept of incepting somebody into a dream is itself kind of interesting and led to some sort of interesting visuals and interesting stuff. But I just think it didn't really trust itself. That it would have been a stronger film with less exposition. And just have them do it. Just have them do it. And, like, maybe you can throw a line in there. But even Lynch, like, this is why I use Lynch specifically, because he very specifically removes this kind of stuff. Like, they're connecting them up to the machines, and somebody could say a line like, okay, you're going into the dream. And Lynch would be like, don't tell him that. Just hook him up to the machine and turn the machine on. And then things will happen, and people will figure it out. Or they won't, and it'll stick with them, and they'll puzzle about it. And that's good. God, I love David Lynch, man. Tim Burton is super overappreciated in my opinion. He pulled off being a subpar director in my opinion by opportunistically pulling off the goth dark aesthetic consistently. Yeah, I think that's right. That he was filling a vacuum. That kind of gothic aesthetic was not really being exploited by anybody in Hollywood, and Burton was the one that was doing it. And he did so with consistency. I think consistency would be the good word to use. I will challenge on one position, which is that Edward Scissorhands is actually a good film. Like, this is the thing about Burton and most of these guys, is that what happens is that they make one thing that they always wanted to make, right? They make the one thing that their heart is just like, I just have this story in my mind about this poor guy who has scissors for hands, right? And then Johnny Depp's performance in it is so endearing and weird, right? And the movie itself is so strange and gothic. You haven't seen anything like it. I think that's the other part of Edward Scissorhands, is you haven't seen anything like it. It's interesting for those reasons. And the story itself is actually not terribly badly told, right? Like, Burton's weakness is that he's not a very good storyteller, but Edward Scissorhands, I think, is the story he wanted to tell, and he did. And so Edward Scissorhands is legit, and that's where he sort of begins. And then everything after that and everything that sort of falls out from that is him just sort of riding on to that. And now he's kind of just like an old boomer trying to appeal to Gen Z badly, which is what Wednesday was. Like, I watched 2 episodes of Wednesday and was just like, bye, we're done. No need to continue. Bread Cultist, good to see you. Yeah, without Batman, Burton and Nolan wouldn't be nearly as big of names, absolutely. The Batman's a really interesting figure in the culture of the American mindset. Another children's story, right, that has become like the center of the culture. Batman literally, like, from the comic books, literally was made for kids. But now we're supposed to believe is like this grown up. And what's really fascinating about Batman is that we are actually seeing in real time the disillusionment of the culture towards this figure. That more than any other children's story that gets told in our culture, we are actually attempting to grow some of these stories up. And they can't be grown up because they are children's stories intended for children. But Batman is the one that we are seeing disintegrate in front of our eyes. That most of the children's stories maintain a certain level of integrity. Like, Superman is Superman, right? Like, he's just a big, strong, powerful guy that beats up a villain. And we're all like, good conquers evil. Great. But the internal contradictions of the Batman story, once you actually make it an adult story, are actually tearing the story apart in front of our eyes. And it's actually because they're still plotting ahead with it. They're still actually trying to make this Batman character make sense, right? Because Superman, you don't need to make sense. He's an alien from another world. He's got his superpowers because of our yellow sun. He's fighting for the good guys in America and is invincible. And so and it's not even good guys in America anymore. It's literally like there's a threat to the Earth itself. He's got to defeat Zangar, the Destructor. Darkseid is upon us. Like that kind of stuff. But because the Batman story is about a billionaire, it's just about a dude, it's actually an intrinsically human story. And as we are attempting to tell that story to adults, the the narrative is starting to fall apart. And the most recent iteration, which was the Pattinson Batman, they actually started to acknowledge it. And for all of these comic book superhero movies, like, I think that the Nolan Batman series, the trilogy, more or less ends up as a big fart. Like, Heath Ledger's performance aside, I think Heath Ledger's performance was good and everybody liked it. But I think people were hoping for more. They wanted more from it. Because I think what they wanted is an actual statement. Like, more than any other superhero franchise, for whatever reason, Batman is the one that I think people want to see told as a real adult story. People want Batman to be the Godfather. That's what they want. That we are looking for a superhero version of the gangster movie, The Godfather. And I think the society has looked at Batman and is looking at this figure and going, that's it. That should the Godfather style story of that kind of scale, that kind of level of story appear in our culture on these superhero movies, it's going to be this Batman. And I think the Joker really, like, I think Heath Ledger's performance really created a kind of legendary status. I think that the movie Joker inverted and really changed the way people view the character of Batman in a serious way. And then I think the Patterson movies really acknowledged it, that it was the first time that Bruce Wayne was a person, you know? That usually Batman is just, like, Bruce Wayne is just the skin that Batman wears in order to trick everybody into not knowing that he's Batman. And that's insane. But the Batman was the first one that actually acknowledged that it's insane and acknowledged that Bruce Wayne is struggling. Like, he's struggling. That he's not okay. Right? Like the Bruce, Christopher Nolan's Bruce Wayne is fine. Right? Like, he's fine. Like, he's just walking around being a normal dude. And then he puts on this costume and fights the darkness. I'm Batman. Right? And then the original Batman, Jack Nicholson's Batman, what's his name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. His Bruce Wayne was, like, fun and, like, completely normal. He was just like a regular Joe. He was just like a likable guy. Right? And it's, like, completely not true. Like, it's absolutely a farce. That if you were Batman, you would be the most fucked up person. Like, I don't think you could even pretend to be a normal person. You understand? Like, that to me is what's so crazy about how Batman has always been portrayed. Even in, like, Batman the Animated Series. Like, you would be fucked up. You would be a fucked up person. You couldn't not be. You spend most of your time in a cave obsessing about crazy people that you want to go beat up. All because you can't get over the death of your own parents. Like, you're nuts, dude. Like, you need therapy, my man. Like, you need some fucking therapy. You need to go find a therapist. You need to tell them about this shit. So, at night, you're putting on a bat costume and fighting criminals in the streets. Yes, that's right. Interesting. Bruce Wayne is the mask. Yeah. That's like from Batman Beyond. There's this scene where they have the old Bruce Wayne and somebody's trying to control Bruce Wayne's mind and make him think that he's going insane. And he's he's like putting voices into his head and trying to drive him insane with voices in his head. And he's constantly like, Bruce, you got to do this. Bruce, everything's going. Bruce, you're going crazy. Bruce, you need to go, and like just drive him mad that way. And then the last scene of the whole thing is that the new Batman kid is like, so why didn't you think that the voices in your head were real? Like, why wasn't it driving you crazy? And Bruce Wayne goes, because in my head I don't call myself Bruce. Like, that's fucking crazy, bro. Like, you're crazy. If you're fucking literally walking around your day-to-day life, right, being Batman, and in your own mind you're like, okay, Batman, it's time to go over here, Batman. We got to go over here, and man, I got a doctor's appointment at 4:30. I better not be late for that, Batman. Batman, better be ready for that 4:30 doctor's appointment, Batman. You're fucking crazy. Like, you are experiencing a significant mental disorder, dude. Like, there is something real significant. And so the Patterson ones, the Batman, because they're going to do a trilogy over about this for sure. It's the first time that they might actually tell this story, where they might actually take this character and say, okay, who would Bruce Wayne actually be? Who would this guy really be? If he was real, if this is a real thing that was actually happening right now in the world in front of us, who is this guy? And the only ending that I think I could justify or take seriously from an artistic standpoint in that trilogy, like, the only way the trilogy happens and it justifies itself to me, and it justifies its existence to me as a piece of art that elevates itself the way that Joker elevated itself, the only way that it actually achieves it is if at the end Bruce Wayne hangs up the mantle of the Batman and says Batman should never have existed. That this world is better off without him. And I, Bruce Wayne, am better off without Batman. That's a strong artistic statement. That's a strong statement. Because Batman should not exist. You want, like, my Marxist analysis of Batman? Under no circumstances should a rational society permit the existence of the Batman. That all of the wealth and all of the money and all of the power and the effort and the energy and the prestige that Bruce Wayne and his enablers are using for him to enact a fantasy of being this dark knight of vengeance to find vengeance for the death of his parents. All of that is being used to create the very conditions that allow crime and poverty to flourish, that allow the worst elements and the most insane people to round up henchmen. That the only reason a guy like Joker can be successful at all is because there are poor people and rejected people and mentally ill people that he can exploit. That if the people of Gotham were prosperous, fed, and healthy, and had jobs, no one would listen to a person like Joker. Joker could never get anything done. Joker could never get anything done except for the fact that the wealth that community itself is responsible for creating is extracted and withheld from the society by Bruce Wayne so that he can put on a bat costume and beat up the very people he is personally responsible for creating, so that he can live a fantasy due to the obsession of the death of his parents. This is what this trilogy must be about for it to be credible. And Joker, the film Joker, exposes all of this. That Joker is created by the conditions of his society. That he had access to healthcare. He had access to help. He is a mentally ill man who is steadily over the course of the film abandoned by the society and by people exactly like Thomas Wayne, who actively runs a campaign in order to abandon him. So the only justification to make another trilogy, especially after the making of Joker, is for Bruce Wayne to recognize this himself. Is for Bruce Wayne to say, this was always me dealing with the death of my parents. That I don't need to fight crime. I need to give my money to the poor and see a fucking therapist. Scarecrow movie. All right, guys, I'm over time. My dog has to go out for a pee. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you never realize it. You just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.